Welcome back to the channel. This is Trinity Storm and you are watching fourth part of What If Naruto Was Bring Back to Life by Spirit King. If you enjoy this video, please like, share and subscribe to the channel. Now wasting no more time, let's start the story.
Itachi jolted to consciousness. Sweat trickled down his face, and he was breathing heavily and anxiously. He exhaled deeply, expressing his physical and emotional anguish. He had been having this nightmare for the past 7 years. From the other side of the room, Kisame groaned. Despite his complaints, Kisame got up and assisted Itachi in taking his medication. If you want to die against Sasuke, you shouldn't stress yourself out. Or take some goddamn sleeping pills. The man said. Do you need to cuddle Samahata? Itachi sighed slightly and ran a hand through his hair once more. The same? Itachi gave a nod. Kisame gave him a shoulder pat. Itachi never had a quiet night. He spent most nights in a world of shadows and darkness, with the faint murmur of voices he could not see. However, on these particular nights, he was back in Konoha, donning his Anbu uniform, his sword drawn, and he could still feel the soft flesh in his hands and blood on his skin. With his hands sticky with perspiration and his blade red from blood, he strolled through the village. And after that, his house. A surge of blood spilled out as he pushed open the doors. Beyond him, lifeless kids drifted like waves on the Crimson Ocean. He knew every single one of them by name. Little Hina was present. She desired a career in dance. Takeda was present. Poets were his dream job. His cousin Ayame was there, sweetheart. She harbored a mild infatuation for the Uzumaki boy. His hands had left marks around their necks, causing their faces to contort in fear. His parents were kneeling with their backs to him and their necks bared as he entered the room with tears in his eyes. And he awoke as he raised his sword. Itachi, you'll be better rested if you take the pills. Itachi gave him a peek. A glimmer crossed his eyes. With a slow nod, Kisame put the sleeping pills away. Standing atop the sheer cliffs at the Kusa no Kuni. Taki no Kuni border, Jiraiya sighed deeply. With his eyes shaded from the rain, he peered out over Kusa no Kuni. Beside him, Iruka was sipping a tiny bit of sake from a bottle. Despite his significant improvement, the man retained his taste for alcohol and kept some on hand at all times. Although Jiraiya had mostly weaned him off of it, it remained the Chunin's one and only vice. Why don't we move through Hano no Taikoku? It's the shortest route to Nami no Kuni. Yes, but the Konoha. Nin and Hano no Taikoku military is spread out everywhere. Hell, these countries here are part of the Taikoku. We're not safe here. I don't want Tsunade to hear about us. With a nod, Iruka shut his bottle and hung it around his waist. Alright. So, why are we here then, if they're here too? Jiraiya gave a shrug. The majority of their forces should be based around the borders and the major population centers. We're going to circle through AIM and along the K's high border, searching for the boy as we go. He was to look for a boy who radiated death, as Kurama had instructed. He had previously stated that he wouldn't require any further information. In his opinion, he would have liked the Kitsune to provide him with more specific information. However, it is possible that he was unaware of his Jinchuriki's identity. Come on. We've got to find a Jinchuriki. The small boat sailed into the docks in Kirigakure. The 16 passengers were still somewhat bloody, smelling and covered in sea spray. Ulquiorra positioned himself at the prow, gazing intently at the village. A few small warships clustered around them, directing them into dock under the flags of Kiri and Mizu no Kuni. Mei and Gaara were standing on the quayside with several important officials and a sizable group of daimyo, among them, to his surprise, the daimyo of Haru no Kuni, Kazuhana Koyuki. Other than a more somber face, she hadn't changed much. Gaara greeted his friend Ulquiorra with a warm, welcome back, shaking his hand as he got off the boat. How did it go? He assisted Hinata onto the dock and surveyed the crowd, saying, exactly as planned. Konoha will no doubt be aware of who enacted the assault. I take it these are the daimyo of the southern nations? Yes. They have agreed to talk inside the Cage's office. They are awaiting a full report. Then let us go. An hour or so later, the important ninjas and dignitaries gathered around a big circular table within the Mizukage building. Ulquiorra surveyed them, counting the number of daimyo in attendance while glancing down at the list of participating nations. Having already thrown in their lot with the scheme and busily getting ready for battle, the K's and Mizu daimyo were not present. All the nations' names were listed along with their reasons for coming. Salutations to Kuni. The daimyo was only here to reinforce their position, which was already firmly established due to Konoha and Hano no Taikoku's attacks on the nation. Kuni Tasuki. Although wealthy, the nation was more dependent on other countries for security. The daimyo knew his country would be the next to fall if Mizu no Kuni and Kiri did. Kuni no Umi. Umi no Kuni was a surprise visit due to its trade ties to what had been Hai no Kuni. The daimyo had apparently declared that her country had had enough of being ruled by Hano no Taikoku. Ulquiorra mentally noted that he should still monitor the country. This addressed the principal armed forces of the southern nations. Numerous smaller nations joined for essentially the same reasons as their more powerful allies. The kingdoms of the oceans understood things differently. Even though they could fight each other, their small size would prevent them from being able to repel a large-scale invasion from the continent. Thus, they set aside past grievances and banded together to defend themselves during these trying times. The 10 southern nations, which comprised the 4 major powers, each had a name centered around the ocean in a unique blue color and symbol. The remaining ones were Fun no Kuni, Teiko no Kuni, Kairyu no Kuni, Kujiara no Kuni, Same no Kuni, and Sango no Kuni. The countries surrounding K's no Kuni followed. Ishi no Kuni. This country was among the most vulnerable because it was situated on the border between K's no Kuni and Tsuchi no Kuni. Their priority was to subjugate Tsuchi no Kuni before proceeding with K's. Kuma no Kuni as well as Tori no Kuni. Tori no Kuni and Kuma no Kuni, like their neighbor Ishi, were highly vulnerable to invasion. In addition, there were 4 other countries located in the southern region of the continent, across K's no Kuni. They were in grave danger should they fall, just like their marine counterparts, who were heavily dependent on their northern allies. In addition, they shared names and symbols and wore clothing with a darker shade of desert. Hokori no Kuni, Rorin, Sabaku no Kuni, and Suna no Kuni were among them. Ulquiorra cleared his throat, casting a glance over the daimyo. Welcome, daimyo. Join. I am grateful for your presence. As you know, the reason for this meeting is to discuss the Hai and Konoha problem. Everyone in the assembly moved uncomfortably, creating a ripple effect. A quiet chuckle of agreement was heard. You were asked to attend this meeting as you all have a stake to lose should Hano no Taikoku gain dominance on the continent. They are already in charge, the same daimyo mumbled. Ulquiorra gave a nod. Yes. The issue is that we all know that they will continue to expand. The eastern continent is fairly small and would be easily dispatched. The southern nations too. And the western nations. We are all under threat. He placed his hand on the surface. There is a choice before you, daimyo. Join. They may be the greatest force at present, but they have so far been focused on the mainland. They haven't yet turned their eyes south. This is the choice. You can bow and simper and be occupied. Or you can stand and fight. And win. Bah, snorted the Umi daimyo. Well, boy, how do you think we can win? It's hopeless. There were several nods in succession. Ulquiorra started to question whether someone was paying her to sow discord and distrust among the southern nations. If I may speak bluntly, daimyo. Join, you have a chance if you put aside your cowardice. The tone of his voice made everyone wince, as they were too shocked to respond to his slight. He moved around the table, passing between the entourages and behind each daimyo, saying, Konoha is focused on the strongest nations. Tsuchi and Kaminari. They have left you all alone. Take this to its logical conclusion. They do not see you as a threat. That is no insult, it is fact. He stopped behind the Umi daimyo, his eyes penetrating her skull, saying, their attention is to the north and the west, not to the south. Divide and conquer. She shifted under his intense stare, uncomfortable. Hano no Taikoku is large and therein lies its weakness. It is like a massive predator. It must focus its attention on one target to use its power to full effect. They are distracted by not only Tsuchi no Kuni and Kaminari no Kuni but also by Akatsuki. The wolf is busy fighting a bear and an ox. The foxes can slip in and bite it and let it bleed to death. He continued to stand behind the Kuma daimyo. There was a chorus of acknowledgement and nods. Akatsuki holds the Biju. No doubt you have all launched your own missions and attempts to get the Biju, and I intend to succeed. The Suna daimyo asked in shock, pardon? You can't be serious. Akatsuki is a group of the greatest ninja alive. And I have killed 2 of them. You are aware of who I am? Smiles. Deidara and Sasori died at my hand, as did Orochimaru. Aside from their ridiculous escape skills and refusal to die, they do not present too large a problem. The Biju are the trump card. When we free them, we could release them or seal them inside Jinchuriki. I doubt Konoha could stand up to 7 Jinchuriki. Gaara cracked a smirk. And you seem to forget the major point I have made. The Taikoku and Konoha are so focused on their present targets that they will not fight us directly. Returning to his location, Mei unfolded a map displaying the elemental nations. As he spoke, he put a finger on Hano no Taikoku and moved it over the different nations. Konoha is focused on defeating Akatsuki and the other great nations. While it does that, it will send the smaller nations or provinces against us. Konoha themselves will be divided into 4. 1 to deal with Akatsuki, Tsuchi, Kaminari and us. He raised his gaze to them. Due to their divided attention, we have the advantage. With a nervous clear of the throat, the Tori daimyo spoke. So, the plan is that you deal with Akatsuki and capture the Biju, while we hold off whatever the Taikoku sends at us? Correct. I will spend most of my time on the mainland searching for the Akatsuki, however, my great speed will transport me here swiftly if called and I will be conducting guerrilla campaign against Hai and Konoha as I go. Umi spoke up once more. What you fail? I shall not. Ha. You're just one man. If you fail, and we stand behind you, they will destroy us all. I say we stand back and wait for their offers. Ulquiorra saw that her remarks had many people worried. When you lose, they'll come after us. The sea will run red with our people's blood. I say we remain neutral and hope they extend mercy. Ulquiorra spoke calmly over the mounting clamor as he observed the panic spreading throughout the assembly and the progress he had made being undone. Enough. Glancing over them, he gestured to Konoha. If you do not stand and fight, your seas will run red, with the sails of Hano no Taikoku and their Ashigaru. Then it will run with blood. The earth will be sown with the dead. Do I need to elaborate further? Why do you think there are classes for kunoichi to prepare them for some of the trash they will have to fight or might be captured by? You will have bastard children conceived in a matter of weeks. Disregarding the glances that the kunoichi were receiving, he placed his hands in his pockets. If you do not fight, you will be destroyed. If you fight with me, you have a decent chance of survival. That is all one can ask for in war. Out of curiosity, how long have you been in the pay of Hai? A pregnant silence fell. The Umi daimyo raised her face, flushed, and worked her jaw up and down for a brief moment. How dare you? I would not. He withdrew a hand and pointed to a small letter that was sticking out of the guard's pocket. Hai and Konoha are your main customers. Your wealth is based on Hano no Taikoku and Konoha. Kuma and Ishii have a great stake in Konoha. I believe Suna likewise holds massive stock. Yet, you are the only one who complains. It looks like it was only just received. You lingered on the floor below as we passed the embassies. I am also correct in thinking that no one outside of the assembled parties was informed of this meeting? Mei got up gradually. As far as everyone outside this room knows, we are all just meeting for trade deals. With a quick look between Ulquiorra and his daimyo, the guard grabbed the letter. But before he could conceal it, Ulquiorra was beside him. He opened it after tearing it from the man. Ulquiorra arched an eyebrow. Care to explain why you're reporting to Konoha? The guard spun to flee at his words, but Gaara threw him against the wall with a sand wave. She started to run, her guards forming a wall to give her time to get away. Hold him there, Gaara. Umi. Regretfully, the Umi guards were easily dispatched by the Kiri Anbu and other guards. The daimyo was sinidoed by Ulquiorra, obstructing her path. With her eyes wide, she pulled out a knife, but before she could, his iron grip closed around her throat, dragging the rapidly disintegrating woman back to the group. It appears that the others have been handled, he said, putting her back in her seat. May turned to face the woman, nodding. Now, Ulquiorra, what does the letter say? It's an order to report everything that happened in this meeting to Konoha and Hano no Taikoku. They were also to prevent anything that might prove a threat to them. Gara, I think we can dispatch of the last one. Subaku Soso. Gara crushed the man with a twisted hand. He glanced up at the daimyo in question and said, "Thank you. It seems Umi has been helping Hai for some time. I'm guessing at least a year. The fact that her clothes are of a higher quality silk than the others implies she's been receiving extensive bribes." As Umi opened her mouth to speak, Anko put a kunai to her throat. The daimyo cast his gaze between Ulquiorra and his friends. Well, aren't we the hypocrite? They have turned their backs on Konoha. Ironic, considering. It also appears that Umi cannot be trusted with its current leadership. The daimyo Fume spoke up. We cannot kill her. There is no one else to rule the nation. Ulquiorra gave a slow nod. Then it seems prudent to give her incentive to remain loyal to us. He looked over at Anko. Are there any seals in your repertoire that can keep her under control? The Suna daimyo said, hold on. You can't be serious. Inflicting a mind control seal on a daimyo. Koyuki faced the Suna daimyo and motioned for Umi. She's been on Hai and Konoha's side for who knows how long. I'd say she deserved death. While I agree with you, Kazuhana Sama, the fact remains that we cannot afford to kill off an ally. The daimyo Fume spoke up. Keep her as a hostage, perhaps. Ulquiorra paused to reflect. Answer honestly, Umi. It will decide your fate. Where stands your people? Itachi jolted to consciousness. Sweat trickled down his face, and he was breathing heavily and anxiously. He exhaled deeply, expressing his physical and emotional anguish. He had been having this nightmare for the past 7 years. From the other side of the room, Kisame groaned. Despite his complaints, Kisame got up and assisted Itachi in taking his medication. If you want to die against Sasuke, you shouldn't stress yourself out. Or take some goddamn sleeping pills. The man said. Do you need to cuddle Samahata? Itachi sighed slightly and ran a hand through his hair once more. The same? Itachi gave a nod. Kisame gave him a shoulder pat. Itachi never had a quiet night. He spent most nights in a world of shadows and darkness, with the faint murmur of voices he could not see. However, on these particular nights, he was back in Konoha, donning his Anbu uniform, his sword drawn, and he could still feel the soft flesh in his hands and blood on his skin. With his hands sticky with perspiration and his blade red from blood, he strolled through the village. And after that, his house. A surge of blood spilled out as he pushed open the doors. Beyond him, lifeless kids drifted like waves on the crimson ocean. He knew every single one of them by name. Little Hina was present. She desired a career in dance. Takeda was present. Poets were his dream job. His cousin Ayame was there, sweetheart. She harbored a mild infatuation for the Uzumaki boy. His hands had left marks around their necks, causing their faces to contort in fear. His parents were kneeling with their backs to him and their necks bared as he entered the room with tears in his eyes. And he awoke as he raised his sword. Itachi, you'll be better rested if you take the pills. Itachi gave him a peek. A glimmer crossed his eyes. With a slow nod, Kisame put the sleeping pills away. Standing atop the sheer cliffs at the Kusa no Kuni. Taki no Kuni border, Jiraiya sighed deeply. With his eyes shaded from the rain, he peered out over Kusa no Kuni. Beside him, Iruka was sipping a tiny bit of sake from a bottle. Despite his significant improvement, the man retained his taste for alcohol and kept some on hand at all times. Although Jiraiya had mostly weaned him off of it, it remained the Chunin's one and only vice. Why don't we move through Hano no Taikoku? It's the shortest route to Nami no Kuni. Yes, but the Konoha Nin and Hano no Taikoku military is spread out everywhere. Hell, these countries here are part of the Taikoku. We're not safe here. I don't want Tsunade to hear about us. With a nod, Iruka shut his bottle and hung it around his waist. All right. So, why are we here then, if they're here too? Jiraiya gave a shrug. The majority of their forces should be based around the borders and the major population centers. We're going to circle through AIM and along the K's high border, searching for the boy as we go. He was to look for a boy who radiated death, as Kurama had instructed. He had previously stated that he wouldn't require any further information. In his opinion, he would have liked the Kitsune to provide him with more specific information. However, it is possible that he was unaware of his Jinchuriki's identity. Come on. We've got to find a Jinchuriki. The small boat sailed into the docks in Kirigakure. The 16 passengers were still somewhat bloody, smelling and covered in sea spray. Ulquiorra positioned himself at the prow, gazing intently at the village. A few small warships clustered around them, directing them into dock under the flags of Kiri and Mizu no Kuni. Mei and Gaara were standing on the quayside with several important officials and a sizable group of daimyo, among them, to his surprise, the daimyo of Haru no Kuni, Kazuhana Koyuki. Other than a more somber face, she hadn't changed much. Gaara greeted his friend Ulquiorra with a warm, "Welcome back," shaking his hand as he got off the boat. How did it go? He assisted Hinata onto the dock and surveyed the crowd, saying, exactly as planned. Konoha will no doubt be aware of who enacted the assault. I take it these are the daimyo of the southern nations? Yes. They have agreed to talk inside the Cage's office. They are awaiting a full report. Then let us go. An hour or so later, the important ninjas and dignitaries gathered around a big circular table within the Mizukage building. Ulquiorra surveyed them, counting the number of daimyo in attendance while glancing down at the list of participating nations. Having already thrown in their lot with the scheme and busily getting ready for battle, the K's and Mizu daimyo were not present. All the nations' names were listed along with their reasons for coming. Salutations to Kuni. The daimyo was only here to reinforce their position, which was already firmly established due to Konoha and Hano no Taikoku's attacks on the nation. Kuni Tasuki. Although wealthy, the nation was more dependent on other countries for security. The daimyo knew his country would be the next to fall if Mizu no Kuni and Kiri did. Kuni no Umi. Umi no Kuni was a surprise visit due to its trade ties to what had been Hai no Kuni. The daimyo had apparently declared that her country had had enough of being ruled by Hano no Taikoku. Ulquiorra mentally noted that he should still monitor the country. This addressed the principal armed forces of the southern nations. Numerous smaller nations joined for essentially the same reasons as their more powerful allies. The kingdoms of the oceans understood things differently. Even though they could fight each other, their small size would prevent them from being able to repel a large-scale invasion from the continent. Thus, they set aside past grievances and banded together to defend themselves during these trying times. The 10 southern nations, which comprised the 4 major powers, each had a name centered around the ocean in a unique blue color and symbol. The remaining ones were Fun no Kuni, Teiko no Kuni, Kairyu no Kuni, Kujiara no Kuni, Same no Kuni, and Sango no Kuni. The countries surrounding K's no Kuni followed. Ishi no Kuni. This country was among the most vulnerable because it was situated on the border between K's no Kuni and Tsuchi no Kuni. Their priority was to subjugate Tsuchi no Kuni before proceeding with K's. Kuma no Kuni as well as Tori no Kuni. Tori no Kuni and Kuma no Kuni, like their neighbor Ishi, were highly vulnerable to invasion. In addition, there were 4 other countries located in the southern region of the continent, across K's no Kuni. They were in grave danger should they fall, just like their marine counterparts, who were heavily dependent on their northern allies. In addition, they shared names and symbols and wore clothing with a darker shade of desert. Hokori no Kuni, Rorin, Sabaku no Kuni, and Suna no Kuni were among them. Ulquiorra cleared his throat, casting a glance over the daimyo. Welcome, daimyo. Join. I am grateful for your presence. As you know, the reason for this meeting is to discuss the Hai and Konoha problem. Everyone in the assembly moved uncomfortably, creating a ripple effect. A quiet chuckle of agreement was heard. You were asked to attend this meeting as you all have a stake to lose should Hano no Taikoku gain dominance on the continent. They are already in charge, the same daimyo mumbled. Ulquiorra gave a nod. Yes. The issue is that we all know that they will continue to expand. The eastern continent is fairly small and would be easily dispatched. The southern nations too. And the western nations. We are all under threat. He placed his hand on the surface. There is a choice before you, daimyo. Join. They may be the greatest force at present, but they have so far been focused on the mainland. They haven't yet turned their eyes south. This is the choice. You can bow and simper and be occupied. Or you can stand and fight. And win. Bah, snorted the Umi daimyo. Well, boy, how do you think we can win? It's hopeless. There were several nods in succession. Ulquiorra started to question whether someone was paying her to sow discord and distrust among the southern nations. If I may speak bluntly, daimyo. Join, you have a chance if you put aside your cowardice. The tone of his voice made everyone wince, as they were too shocked to respond to his slight. He moved around the table, passing between the entourages and behind each daimyo, saying, Konoha is focused on the strongest nations. Tsuchi and Kaminari. They have left you all alone. Take this to its logical conclusion. They do not see you as a threat. That is no insult, it is fact. He stopped behind the Umi daimyo, his eyes penetrating her skull, saying, their attention is to the north and the west, not to the south. Divide and conquer. She shifted under his intense stare, uncomfortable. Hano no Taikoku is large and therein lies its weakness. It is like a massive predator. It must focus its attention on one target to use its power to full effect. They are distracted by not only Tsuchi no Kuni and Kaminari no Kuni but also by Akatsuki. The wolf is busy fighting a bear and an ox. The foxes can slip in and bite it and let it bleed to death. He continued to stand behind the Kuma daimyo. There was a chorus of acknowledgement and nods. Akatsuki holds the Biju. No doubt you have all launched your own missions and attempts to get the Biju, and I intend to succeed. The Suna daimyo asked in shock, pardon? You can't be serious. Akatsuki is a group of the greatest ninja alive. And I have killed 2 of them. You are aware of who I am? Smiles. Deidara and Sasori died at my hand, as did Orochimaru. Aside from their ridiculous escape skills and refusal to die, they do not present too large a problem. The Biju are the trump card. When we free them, we could release them or seal them inside Jinchuriki. I doubt Konoha could stand up to 7 Jinchuriki. Gaara cracked a smirk. And you seem to forget the major point I have made. The Taikoku and Konoha are so focused on their present targets that they will not fight us directly. Returning to his location, Mei unfolded a map displaying the elemental nations. As he spoke, he put a finger on Hano no Taikoku and moved it over the different nations. Konoha is focused on defeating Akatsuki and the other great nations. While it does that, it will send the smaller nations or provinces against us. Konoha themselves will be divided into 4. 1 to deal with Akatsuki, Tsuchi, Kaminari and us. He raised his gaze to them. Due to their divided attention, we have the advantage. With a nervous clear of the throat, the Tori daimyo spoke. So, the plan is that you deal with Akatsuki and capture the Biju, while we hold off whatever the Taikoku sends at us? Correct. I will spend most of my time on the mainland searching for the Akatsuki, however, my great speed will transport me here swiftly if called and I will be conducting guerrilla campaign against Hai and Konoha as I go. Umi spoke up once more. What you fail? I shall not. Ha. You're just one man. If you fail, and we stand behind you, they will destroy us all. I say we stand back and wait for their offers. Ulquiorra saw that her remarks had many people worried. When you lose, they'll come after us. The sea will run red with our people's blood. I say we remain neutral and hope they extend mercy. Ulquiorra spoke calmly over the mounting clamor as he observed the panic spreading throughout the assembly and the progress he had made being undone. Enough. Glancing over them, he gestured to Konoha. If you do not stand and fight, your seas will run red, with the sails of Hano no Taikoku and their Ashigaru. Then it will run with blood. The earth will be sown with the dead. Do I need to elaborate further? Why do you think there are classes for kunoichi to prepare them for some of the trash they will have to fight or might be captured by? You will have bastard children conceived in a matter of weeks. Disregarding the glances that the kunoichi were receiving, he placed his hands in his pockets. If you do not fight, you will be destroyed. If you fight with me, you have a decent chance of survival. That is all one can ask for in war. Out of curiosity, how long have you been in the pay of high? A pregnant silence fell. The Umi daimyo raised her face, flushed, and worked her jaw up and down for a brief moment. How dare you? I would not. He withdrew a hand and pointed to a small letter that was sticking out of the guard's pocket. Hai and Konoha are your main customers. Your wealth is based on Hano no Taikoku and Konoha. Kuma and Ishii have a great stake in Konoha. I believe Suna likewise holds massive stock. Yet, you are the only one who complains. It looks like it was only just received. You lingered on the floor below as we passed the embassies. I am also correct in thinking that no one outside of the assembled parties was informed of this meeting? Mei got up gradually. As far as everyone outside this room knows, we are all just meeting for trade deals. With a quick look between Ulquiorra and his daimyo, the guard grabbed the letter. But before he could conceal it, Ulquiorra was beside him. He opened it after tearing it from the man. Ulquiorra arched an eyebrow. Care to explain why you're reporting to Konoha? The guard spun to flee at his words, but Gaara threw him against the wall with a sand wave. She started to run, her guards forming a wall to give her time to get away. Hold him there, Gaara. Umi. Regretfully, the Umi guards were easily dispatched by the Kiri Anbu and other guards. The daimyo was sinidoed by Ulquiorra, obstructing her path. With her eyes wide, she pulled out a knife, but before she could, his iron grip closed around her throat, dragging the rapidly disintegrating woman back to the group. It appears that the others have been handled, he said, putting her back in her seat. Mei turned to face the woman, nodding. Now, Ulquiorra, what does the letter say? It's an order to report everything that happened in this meeting to Konoha and Hano no Taikoku. They were also to prevent anything that might prove a threat to them. Gaara, I think we can dispatch of the last one. Subaku Soso. Gaara crushed the man with a twisted hand. He glanced up at the daimyo in question and said, thank you. It seems Umi has been helping Hai for some time. I'm guessing at least a year. The fact that her clothes are of a higher quality silk than the others implies she's been receiving extensive bribes. As Umi opened her mouth to speak, Anko put a kunai to her throat. The daimyo cast his gaze between Ulquiorra and his friends. Well, aren't we the hypocrite? They have turned their backs on Konoha. Ironic, considering. It also appears that Umi cannot be trusted with its current leadership. The daimyo Fume spoke up. We cannot kill her. There is no one else to rule the nation. Ulquiorra gave a slow nod. Then it seems prudent to give her incentive to remain loyal to us. He looked over at Anko. Are there any seals in your repertoire that can keep her under control? The Suna daimyo said, hold on. You can't be serious. Inflicting a mind control seal on a daimyo. Koyuki faced the Suna daimyo and motioned for Umi. She's been on Hai and Konoha's side for who knows how long. I'd say she deserved death. While I agree with you, Kazuhana Sama, the fact remains that we cannot afford to kill off an ally. The daimyo Fun spoke up. Keep her as a hostage, perhaps. Ulquiorra paused to reflect. Answer honestly, Umi. It will decide your fate. Where stands your people? The woman gave a growl, but Anko's gentle hiss and some pressure from her blade made her say something. They are not loyal to Hai. They will stand by your alliance. He clarified, seeing everyone's bewildered expressions. Good. You will remain here as a goodwill ambassador. And a double agent. You will relay to Konoha what we tell you to. You will do so unquestioningly, without trick or fail. Disobey that, and you will be on the end of a tragic assassination by Konoha. Anko giggled and licked her lips in kunai, and the woman nodded, her eyes filled with fear. Take her to a secure location in the building. We have plans to draw up. Now that the Umi daimyo had left, the dialogue resumed where it had left off. Ulquiorra's remarks, coupled with the realization that what was being said was simply high propaganda, caused an alliance to be formed quickly. The headquarters will be here in Kiri. Sanagakure is too close to the Hano no Taikoku. What communication methods are available? Messenger birds and relay jutsus. That's when chakra signals are passed through a mirror or other object that has a twin with a similar chakra receiver embedded in it. There is only a slight delay of a few seconds between the words being said and the words being heard. Good. We shall set up relays between Sanagakure and Kiri for use during the conflict. Messenger routes shall be organized between each of the countries and villages for communication. My Sonito is fast, but can the relays transport people? No. The stress is too much, it ruptures most internal organs. A pity. We shall have to organize rapid deployment routes in order to move troops from the further nations to Kase and Mizu no Kuni. Fun raised his voice. As our nation's name implies, we have the finest fleet. All the maritime nations attempted to claim they had the best fleet, which caused a ruckus. A Ryotsu surge soothed them. I mean, we have the largest fleet and most of those are transports, slick and fast. We can supply the rapid mobilization force. Very well. Putting aside all your biases, who has the best navy commanders? That would be Mizu no Kuni. Very well. Contact the Mizu daimyo, his finest admiral shall be in charge of the naval defenses. The armies shall be pooled together and arrayed for the defense of the nations, along the border of Mizu, ready to repel an assault. A portion should be ready to be sent to help the others on the western front. Likewise, the K's fleets should be ready to defend its ocean flank and to send aid the eastern front. Kazahana. Sama, would you please see if you can gather support among the northern nations? Of course. My armies are also ready to come to the aid of Kaminari. And thus bring them into the fold. Cunning. Thank you, Kazahana. Sama. Gaara gave a nod. What of Ishii, Tori and Kuma? There along the border of Tsuchi? The daimyo nodded, saying, they should pool their resources together. Gaara, you shall also supply ninja to aid them. The same one spoke up. Forgive my rudeness, Cifer. San, but what gives you the authority to make all these decisions? They are wise choices, yes, but I'm concerned over the matter of authority. Mei and Gaara were standing next to Ulquiorra. The Cage have given me their backing, as have the K's and Mizu daimyo. I have all the necessary authority. They have given me permission to make the war plans. Your input will not be ignored. He knew better than to upset a daimyo. That was the error Grimjow had made with Aizen. The man bowed his head, satisfied, and the plan moved forward quickly. As said, I shall be conducting a guerrilla campaign against Akatsuki and Konoha. While I do that, I shall be out of contact, unless there is a method of long-range communication available for a person to carry. Ulquiorra saw Hinata's eyes lock on him and said, there are headsets, but they run on chakra. Which is out of the question for you. Unless you have someone go with you. All right. While I am gone, Gaara and Mei shall remain in command. After additional deliberations, Ulquiorra's group was deployed. They shall remain here to provide aid and tactical support. When needed, I would advise giving them a fast ship to move between the two fronts. Guy raised his voice. Now, we need a name. The Alliance. It was a conclusive tone. It refused to back down. It was obvious that Ulquiorra would not permit the daimyo or anyone else to make any lofty decisions. Ultimately, it was dubbed the Southern Alliance. I'm coming with you. Don't give me that look. Fine. I'm heading out tomorrow after breakfast. We're heading out after breakfast. Karen glanced around the lab. She gave Mei a smile and a nod. Thanks. I'll use it to the best of my ability. Good. You'll be a great help with your past experience. Thanks. Now, where did I leave that corpse? It's not like that. There was only one significant event in Kiri that evening. When the topic of funding and money came up during dinner, Ulquiorra responded angrily by dumping the sealing scroll containing the gold cash on the table. There is a large fortune here. It can provide sufficient funding for a time. I have my own fortune that can also provide funding for the war. As the dinner went on, Hinata started to gather her courage. She needed to discuss the mission with him. As everyone retired to their rooms after dinner, Hinata sat on their bed and gazed up at him. Instead of being in the room, Hanabi was out for a brief stroll with Rin. Despite their different ages, the two girls had gotten to know one another during the task force's absence and had grown close. She spoke about a very relevant topic during her absence. Ulquiorra. Kun, when are we going to get married? Ulquiorra, who was in the middle of packing a backpack and a set of scrolls for the first expedition, stopped and gave her a startled look. The oddness of his expression made her laugh. After giving it some thought, he returned his attention to the packing. "I don't know. I was going to leave that decision up to you." With a nervous grin on her face, Hinata put her fingertips together. It was a small eccentricity that she hadn't quite outgrown. She said, looking up at him, "Well," and he turned back to face her. "You want to get married before we leave?" We might not get another chance for a few months or so, depending on how long we spend out there," she said. Ulquiorra was not opposed to their marriage, even though he was reluctant to take her with him or to develop their physical relationship. It was, after all, likely the only true fantasy he had. He assumed that part of the reason he didn't feel sexual desire was that he had spent 3,000 years inside a body devoid of the necessary parts. As it was, he had essentially no libido. Of course, he harbored a small amount of sexual desire for her, but it was largely repressed. The problem was that they couldn't put off getting married, even though the idea was definitely not unpleasant. He had to be back on the mainland, causing havoc and interfering with the operations of Hai and Akatsuki. There wouldn't be enough time for a formal ceremony, which Hinata deserved. "I understand. But time is of the essence. We could not have a large ceremony tomorrow morning." He caught her mumbling a few words, focusing on one. "Tonight. You wish to get married tonight?" She shifted her gaze from the floor to his inquiring eyes. With a sigh, she nodded. "Yes. Then, tomorrow, we can leave without delay. I would have thought you wanted a large wedding." With a snort, she stood up and grasped his hands. She blushed a little at her crude remarks, but she said, "To hell with that, let's just get the others and do it now." "Don't you think we're rushing it?" With a steely determination in her gaze and voice, she said, "You nearly died against the Akatsuki both times you fought them." She looked up into his eyes and said, "Deidara would have blown you to smithereens had I not intervened." Tears trickled down her face. "You could overcome some of the best ninja of our time. You're up against them." She sobbed and took a deep breath. "We both could, and who cares if we're moving too fast? We've been together a couple of weeks now. And we've both waited long enough. We don't have to consummate anything. But please, if I die, I want to die knowing that we were together at last." Ulquiorra let out an almost silent sigh of frustration, pulled her close to him, and said nothing. For a short while, they stood there with Hinata sobbing softly into his chest. She smiled and nodded, saying, "I am not familiar with the marriage customs." "Are you? We should gather those you want there. It's 8:30. We have some time. Traditional weddings are meant to be held at night anyway." The group was gathered in a small shrine. It served as a private haven for the union of powerful and influential people with high-level shinobi who preferred to keep their marriages secret. Ulquiorra and Hinata's wedding would have been among the biggest social gatherings of the year if it had taken place during a period of peace and without the fear of death hanging over them. Wearing a long white kimono, Hinata would have been escorted to Ulquiorra before the shrine, her attendants bringing her trousseau to her house. Together with the visiting dignitaries and other notable people, Ulquiorra would have been resplendent in robes or other garments, and the entire village would have been present in a large crowd. Even with the limited and basic service, Hinata wouldn't trade it for all of Ryo. Sama's might. The shrine was made of creamy stone, with tiny orange orbs and pink blossoms from the branches of 2 peach trees covering it. Situated in the canal surrounding the Mizukage office, the shrine was situated on a small island behind the building. There were numerous golden statues of different kami inside the shrine. Each was an exquisite piece of art that accurately portrayed the celestial powers they represented. Ulquiorra led her up the aisle as they stood in front of the Miko and the priest. With his long robes billowing like ghostly mist, he beamed a warm smile at them. Despite everyone else hearing, he spoke quietly. Maybe the biggest smiles of all belonged to Hanabi and Rin. The beauty of the service was not diminished by Ulquiorra or Hinata's decision to forego the traditional marriage garb in favor of their regular attire. The clergyman atoned. The couple, swishing water droplets across their heads. Afterwards, he lifted a cup of sake, which the two took a sip of, after which he handed them another, bigger cup, and so on. The words of commitment came next. Ulquiorra looked into his bride's pale lavender orbs and repeated what the priest had said. I, Ulquiorra Cifer, hereby take Hyuga Hinata as my wife. To have and to hold, to love and to cherish, in sickness and in health, and I ask that the kami that our lives be long and fruitful, peaceful and joyous. Hinata's smile seemed to split her skull wide open. I, Hyuga Hinata, hereby take Ulquiorra Cifer as my husband. To have and to hold, to love and to cherish, in sickness and in health, and I ask that the kami that our lives be long and fruitful, peaceful and joyous. Sniffing, Kurenai tried not to cry happy tears. Without turning to face her, Asuma gave her a handkerchief while wearing a small smile. The others did not appear to be as reclusive. Though Kiba's eyes were full of tears, he was still smiling, and Guy and Lee were covering most of their faces with long streams of almost sky blue tears as they hugged and gave Ulquiorra the thumbs up. While most of the girls were wiping away tears, everyone else was grinning. Tamari gave Gaara a sideways glance. It was time for him to consider acquiring a female. Guy and Lee let out another wail, and Guy exclaimed, "Oh, the youthful fires of their love burn bright," as the priest opened his arms to resume the ceremony. "Oh, Guy. Sensei." Lee. With eyes wide and livid with rage, Karen and Mei abruptly interrupted them, elbowing them to the floor. Karen yelled, "Shut the fuck up you two and don't interrupt the ceremony." Suigetsu painfully rubbed his ear. Mildly, the priest asked, "May I continue?" It was not the most peculiar thing he had ever seen in a nuptial. He said a few more lines at their nod, asking the kami to bless their union, then moved aside so the couple could offer their offerings to the kami. Ulquiorra set down a small bowl of incense and a pouch of gold. Hinata offered another bowl of incense and a bottle of sake. With a kind smile, the priest extended his arms. The service came to an end with a few more words. As Ulquiorra and Hinata locked lips, they were greeted with jubilant cheers. Hanabi joined the other two when they went to bed after having a few drinks together. For a short while, as the newlyweds lay in bed, the only sound in the room was the little girl's gentle breath. "So, what do you think of being Ulquiorra Hyuga? The name means little to me." She laughed and pulled herself closer to him. "Or Cifer, Hinata? Which do you prefer?" She gave him a cheek kiss and smiled up at him, blushing but saying nothing. She blushed and gave him another kiss. "I prefer to think, I'm you. Ulquiorra. Kun's wife." "Ulquiorra, you ought to be leading a team there," Shikamaru remarked. Talk of war dominated breakfast conversations, which were quiet and solemn. Before the meal, Ulquiorra had quickly left for personal reasons, casting a quick glance at Hinata. 4 strangers traveling around the mainland would cause attention. "We'll be able to move faster with fewer people. Besides, who would you suggest I take?" "I would take high-ranked fighters, who would be needed to defend against the high forces." His head was rubbed. "Fine. It's too troublesome to argue with you. You know the pair of you stick out like a sore thumb. I know you're going to be conducting a guerrilla campaign, but you are going to have to buy supplies and so on. There are going to be posters and rewards for you all over the place. Yuhi is a genjutsu master. She has taught an advanced form of henge no jutsu to her students that uses a bit more chakra but is stronger and not as easy to notice. It has to be bound into the caster, blocking some of the tenketsu. As such, it is only useful in certain situations, such as in towns or the like. It has to be consciously lifted. It won't be removed by a slip in concentration, but a strong enough force will lift it." Shikamaru gave a shrug. "Fine. If you do need help, just come back and get us." "Of course." Jugo raised his voice. "You're going to need false names and a story as to why 2 teens who aren't ninja are traveling around the country." Ulquiorra nodded, pushing aside his breakfast and removing a pencil and piece of paper. He jotted down CG. "You're calling yourself Shiro? As in a pun?" "On my skin and the tattoo, yes." It was not chosen for humor, however. Grinning, Hinata completed her meal and penned Khan on the identical sheet of paper. "And I'm Kin. I was thinking that we use the old, 'our parents don't approve of us so we're running away' story. We'll take some of my wealth so we can buy supplies and the like. People are unlikely to question our story if we can pay them. You won't be able to use your gentle fist or your Arankar powers. My sword skills and hand-to-hand combat will be more than enough. I'll pretend to be the son of a dojo master as a disguise for my skill. And Hinata can disguise her gentle fist as punches or kicks, mixing it with her Hokuto Shinken to deal with anyone she fights. A short while later, Ulquiorra left the room to complete packing the bags and sealing scrolls. Just as Hinata turned to follow him, Rin tugged at her sleeve. With a smile, Hinata asked the endearing young girl, Oni. Chan, you'll protect Oni. Chan, right? Of course, Rin. Chan. Mei grinned at her daughter and rolled her eyes, asking, will you bring me back a present? She waved at them and kissed Rin's forehead, saying, of course. The pair put on their disguises after changing out of their regular clothes. Ulquiorra wore brown pants and a gray shirt under her long traveling cloak. He hung the sealing scrolls and Murcielago around his red belt. Sealing scrolls were used by civilians, but they were heavily altered for civilian chakra levels, even though shinobi used them extensively. They depended more on the blood of the person they were keyed to and less on chakra bursts. Therefore, it wouldn't cause too much controversy. Hinata could pretend to be the daughter of a retired ninja if necessary. In the meantime, Hinata was dressed in dark pants and a gray jacket with a black shirt. After they were altered, Hinata proceeded with the Henge no Jutsu's dog. Boar. Ram seals, adding the snake seal at the conclusion. Niku Henge no Jutsu, flesh transformation technique. A discomforting shudder went through Hinata as the jutsu worked. She noticed Ulquiorra's altered appearance as she looked up at him. His long hair took on a striking red hue that reflected his Uzumaki ancestry. She changed it, deciding to change his hair to a silvery white based on his false name, but leaving a single streak of red in the lock that passed over his face, because she knew that such a shade of red would draw attention in the shinobi world. His complexion became more pigmented, eventually reverting to the color he had previously worn, and his upper lip matched his new appearance. His once green cat eyes turned to normal human eyes with a dark brown tint. He nodded, checking out his new physique in a mirror. A fine disguise. And so is yours. Hinata's skin turned tanned and her lavender hair turned a fine golden blonde. A tiny scar crossed her cheek, and her eyes went dark red. Overall, she didn't resemble her true self at all, and with the right attitude, she could get away with it. She gave a nod. The benefit of this method was that those who were practicing the jutsu were tuned into it, which enabled them to see through the illusion and reveal their true forms. This implied that one could filter their vision to see if someone transformed into the other by performing a henge to appear like one of them. It was not the other person if they stayed in that form. Kurenai had instilled this tactic in Hinata and her companions to enhance their abilities as a tracker squad, enabling them to virtually blend in with their surroundings in order to evade being identified as ninja. Okay. Shall we say farewell? Yes. This is your bag, he said, passing her the smaller of the two bags. At the silent gesture, she grinned and placed it across her back. Putting on the bigger one over his cloak, Ulquiorra reached inside his pocket. I have been informed it is tradition for the husband to give his bride a gift. I bought this the morning before breakfast. Hinata smiled, a small but happy smile. She blushed as Ulquiorra's hands closed around her neck, encircling her exposed throat with a necklace while his gentle breath caressed her skin. It was a thin silver chain with an amulet in the shape of a teardrop hanging from it. The amulet had pearls all around it and a single opal inlaid in it. It was little, but priceless. Although Kiri was not well known for its jewelry, this was an exquisite piece of art. She didn't really care about that, though. She gave him a smile. Thank you, you. Ulquiorra. Kun. Before they left the room, their lips briefly touched again. The goodbyes were brief and to the point. Ulquiorra was eager to set out on his mainland campaign, and those who chose to stay behind had their own responsibilities to attend to. The remainder of his friends would serve as leaders, advisors, and sources of information for the southern nations regarding Konoha and Hano no Taikoku. The most emotional were Hanabi and Team 8, who gave Ulquiorra clear cut warnings about what would happen if Hinata was hurt in addition to giving her hugs and advice. The two worst were Kurenai and Hanabi, who threatened him with an endless genjutsu that would see him bludgeoned to death and eaten alive, respectively. He had just shook Gaara's hand, brushing off that threat. He patted Rin's head and gave Yurei some instructions. Finally ready, he took Hinata by the arm and they sonitoed their way away. Wearied by traveling the extreme distance from Kiri to the mainland, stopping only on the many islands between them so he didn't expend too much energy, they landed in the forests of the southern edge of Hano no Taikoku. Shaking his head, he cast his gaze across the forest. Hinata winced in agony. She detested the movement of Sonido and found it to be hardly comfortable. She cleaned herself up and extended her hand to his. Well, we're here. Yes. What's our first move? Ulquiorra produced a scroll, which she opened to show a map of the continental United States. The map had been marked by the former Konohajanin with a variety of symbols designating bases, towers, outposts, and forts. They studied the map. We're here, hinted Hinata, pointing to the hazy area where they had just arrived. There's a tower here, but the nearest fort is about 40 miles inland, she said, tapping a mark a short distance away from their general location. It's near a village, so it shouldn't be hard to find. He folded up the map and turned to face her, saying, then that is our first target. I need time to recharge. We can't use Sonido, so we need to walk for a time. She shivered and said, that's okay, I hate Sonido anyway. Ulquiorra and she strode through the forest at a fast pace. They stayed close, and Hinata grinned at Ulquiorra's involuntary touches to her hand from time to time. When they did talk, it was mostly about the little things, like the itinerary and the places they would be going. But occasionally, they would talk about more private matters. Hinata posed a question that had been on her mind a lot as the sun started to set and they sat on the roots of a big tree for a quick lunch. You. Ulquiorra. Kun, about being married. He stopped eating to give her a curious look. How many kids will we have? She exclaimed. She wished that, in contrast to other situations, her shyness had lessened more with him. Ulquiorra gave her a serious look before continuing. His energy signature slightly changed, indicating that he was filtering his vision to ensure he could properly look at her. How many do you want? That was not what Hinata had anticipated. She thought he would have some say in how many kids they had, even though he was serious and still didn't express his feelings very much. If we make it. I wanted 8 when I was younger, Ulquiorra said, raising an eyebrow. I was younger and immature. I would think 4 would be acceptable. 4? She asked with a smile. The number of kids was a nice round number. 3 girls and a boy? She turned tomato red and stammered, and he gave her a mild look. I have no control over my sperm. However, I shall endeavor to give you your desired offspring. It wasn't a joke, she knew. Thank you. He didn't say anything, but he did scoot closer to her. They came across the village in the late afternoon. It was a sizable community, home to more than 1,000 people. It was arranged along the river's banks to its southern flank in a tidy square pattern. To the north was farmland. To the east and west was open country where loggers were keeping the forest in check. The biggest structure was a wooden tower that rose from a little camp by the river on the town's western boundary. The Ashigaru patrolled the center of the camp, which was encircled by a wooden palisade and gleamed with red lacquered armor. Hinata looked around to make sure they were not being followed by anyone. What is our surname? Sato should suffice. Okay, Sato Shiro. Sato Kin. The Ashigaru hardly even glanced at them as they made their way into the town. After entering the village, they searched for a place to stay. They noticed one, and judging by the throng of people dining and drinking outside and the commotion inside, it was most likely the best or the only choice. They moved toward it and went inside. It was unexpectedly pleasant and clean, even with all the people in it. Warm light was cast by lanterns that were suspended from the ceilings. The air was heavy with the aromas of food and drink, chatting, singing, and yelling. Ulquiorra moved toward the bar and drew Hinata near. Eventually, the owner showed up. Welcome. How may I be of service? We require a room and board for a few days. We may be here for a week or longer, depending. On what? The man sharply inquired. We have been traveling for some time and have a ways to go still. However, we both need rest. We are most likely to leave in a few days though. The man nodded, as if he'd lost interest when it became clear there was nothing to sell them to the guards or use as ransom. The two signed a scroll he had pulled out. He looked over and said, Sato Shiro and Sato Kin. Married? Yes, Hinata answered, planting a kiss on Ulquiorra's cheek. With a nod, the proprietor gave them a key. You have room 12. I need a down payment of 400 Rio. Ulquiorra extended his arm inside his cape to retrieve the sealing scroll holding their money. The man nodded as he put the money down on the counter. Thanks. I'll tally up what everything comes to when you leave. We offer food and drink at all hours. In response to Hinata's disbelief, there is a lot of business coming through here. We get customers at all hours. We're the only ryokan in the village. There's a few taverns and food stands around here, but we're the only inn. There's another on the side of town, but it has an unsavory reputation. You have our money, you don't have to sell your products to us. The man gave a hearty laugh. Old habits die hard. I've been in the business for 23 years. But, he recovered, I'm serious, that place has a bad reputation. If I were you, I'd keep your business out of there and stay away from it. You can't miss it. It's got a red horse painted on the side. We'll keep that in mind. Ulquiorra opened their room after the man showed them up. With a bed in the corner near the open shoji that led to the balcony outside, it was compact but cozy. The room contained a small table, a wardrobe, and a few plants. On the wall beside a small desk was a mirror. A small bath and several soaps were hidden behind another shoji, revealing a portion of the room. There is a sento out back if you want to use it, but the bath here can be used if you want privacy. Just give a holler and we'll send some hot water up. He was thanked by them and walked out, shutting the door. Ulquiorra put his bag down on the bed and pulled his cloak over his head. Hinata glanced at the door and saw that no footsteps were audible. She should have heard the owner's footsteps, even with all the noise downstairs. She glanced back at Ulquiorra, gesturing with her mouth to indicate the door. He gave a nod, and she let out a slightly deeper sigh than usual, deliberately approaching the door without getting too close to scare the man away. Shiro, what was up with that look the man sent us? He wanted to see if there was anything he could use on us to get more money. She let out a relieved laugh. A faint creak came from outside the door. It was clear the man was paying close attention. Sorry, Shiro-kun. It's just, after all that's happened, I was worried our parents had sent word. Your father may be rich, but he's all the way up on the north coast. He's just a well-off merchant. No. One save a ninja would follow us all that way. My father wouldn't send anyone. He's just a dojo master. And I doubt that either would send anyone after us. I'm sorry, it's just, she said as she heard footsteps recede in a creak. He nodded back to her after she nodded. Their possessions were unpacked. The sealed scrolls they carried held all of their valuables and other important items. They merely arranged their belongings in the room to give the impression that they were who they claimed to be to anyone who might be looking through them. After finishing that, they checked the time. Hinata proposed that since it was only 4:20, they go for a stroll through the village. The village was uncomplicated. With the exception of a few shops scattered throughout the settlement, all of the buildings were solid one-story structures. All of them had a straightforward design and were built of stone and wood. They observed the laid-back vibe of the town as they strolled through the village. Though there wasn't much traffic, just the occasional cart and pedestrian, there was a lot of noise. While on their patrol, the Ashigaru conversed and laughed with the people, showing the same level of carelessness. Ulquiorra followed Hinata to the riverbank, dodging the villagers and taking a quick look around to make sure they were unobserved. Whispering, "So, what's the plan? We observe for a day or two. Once we have discovered the opportune moment, I'll infiltrate the camp and kill the commander and burn down the tower. Once that is done, we'll leave with the normal traffic to avoid attention," he responded in a quiet voice. 6 times the gong ran out, and she looked up while nodding. 6 o'clock. What now? We should go to the other side of the village and examine the camp. We'll take a walk by the riverside, to show we're not spying. They saw that there was no actual threat from the camera. Although the palisade was tall, Ulquiorra and Hinata could easily climb over it. An evident weakness was the small jetty that led out onto the river and the small door that led there. The tower would also quickly catch fire because it was entirely constructed of wood. With a romantic lean, Hinata was staring at the camp from the corner of her eye. Everyone in the Hyuga tribe had superior vision even without the use of the Byakugan. She glanced over the wall's edge and noticed a guard's head. Still blushing from their marriage, she whispered to her husband that since there was a parapet on the other side of the wall, there might have been guards patrolling when he broke in. He thanked her anyway, retorting that sentries would be present in any camp. Hinata tensed up and peered into the forest to the west. "Ulquiorra," she said quietly, "there's a shinobi approaching. I can sense a chakra approaching." "You're a sensor?" he asked in return. "Kurenai. Sensei taught me the basics. I'm part of the tracker team after all." After a minute or two of silence, Ulquiorra realized who was coming. It was an Anbu. The man wore the standard Anbu gear and had a falcon mask covering his face. A series of scratches ran the length of his wrist. Ulquiorra surmised that they were victory marks, one for every mission accomplished. He seemed to have a lowly status. The man entered the camp and strolled past them, paying no attention to the two. After returning to the inn, Ulquiorra and Hinata ate in the corner. Shiro and Kin reverted to their real names and resumed their conversation with the proprietor while they were eating. "Do you get a lot of trouble here?" "There's a lot of Ashigaru. Bless me, no Sato. San. The daimyo sent them here for the next campaign." With a hint of curiosity, Ulquiorra asked, "Into the southern nations?" "Yeah. Bloody shits have been uppity over the last few years. We should have put them in their place years ago." "Uppity? We've been in the north for years, so we don't know much about this." "Boy, you must have lived in a really isolated place not to hear about it." Hinata gave a nod. "Well, Suna launched an attack on Konoha 3 years ago. Turns out it was Orochimaru in disguise. Now, how can any real village let themselves be infiltrated like that? Really, there should only be one village. Konoha. It's the best in the world." Ulquiorra gave a nod, and the man continued. "Then, you get all these other nations. They all keep out of the real issues, then when something happens to them they band together and beat it. They're just a bunch of damn cowards. They even use the pirates in their seas to attack us." "I see. So the guards are here to keep an eye out for trouble?" "Yes. The daimyo has rightly said that there'll be a war soon. It's blessed news everywhere you go. Everything is going right. Soon, we're all going to be part of the greatest empire in the world. Hano no Taikoku is the best thing for the world. Sorry, gotta go." He fled to fulfill another request. Ulquiorra and Hinata looked at each other. It appeared that the idea of global dominance was more widespread than they had first believed. By listening in on other conversations, they discovered that everyone had the same viewpoint. The following 2 days went by in a similar manner. They looked around the camp and saw that the best time to strike would be at night, at about 1 o'clock, when the sentries change. Their best opportunity to break in was when the new sentries would be sleepy. The Anbu posed the biggest threat. Both were optimistic about their chances, though, given their prior success against the Anbu. They performed on the third night. Ulquiorra and Hinata Sanido on top of the tower as the gong struck 1. Clinging to the shadows, they observed the ladder from the tower's lower level while they awaited the arrival of the new guard. A line of tents below them housed the sleeping soldiers. During the night, the Ashigaru stayed inside the camp while the town's own guards, simple peasants armed with swords and jute, took positions throughout the town. Ulquiorra surmised that the Ashigaru might have been members of the upcoming invasion force, sent to recruit locals for the army in addition to guarding the region. A soldier ascended the ladder and assumed his duty, while Ulquiorra leaned forward. Another emerged too, identifying them. Before he could cry out, Hinata used a kunai to stab the other man in the back while Ulquiorra snapped his neck. In order to silence the corpses, they were lowered to the ground. Giving him a nod, Hinata leapt to her feet, landing on the wall and clinging to the end of one of the logs. When he heard her, a soldier turned, baring his throat. He was stabbed in the throat by Hinata, who was still hanging there. He held onto the kunai, but as she gradually released him from the steel, he fell back. She dropped to the walkway, crouching low, blood streaming from his ripped neck. She applied her training as she looked around. She moved fast, swinging her kunai and striking the soldiers silently and quickly in the necks and armpits. Even though some of them were able to yell, she quickly took their lives. With haste, she cleared the walkway, gesturing to him with her blade before vaulting over the palisade and clinging to the wall from the opposite side. Ulquiorra scanned the remainder of the camp with his sharp eye. Despite Hinata's silence, the Anbu was moving in the direction of the ladder leading to the wall. Walk. The Ashigaru had called the ninja, "There is something in the forest," so he leaned over and called, "Anbu." San. With a quick glance up at the tower, the Anbu nodded and leapt straight to the summit. He drew his sword as soon as he saw him and the bodies. He had no idea that Hinata had returned to the camp's walls and was now the primary threat. She proceeded with her gruesome task. "Who are you?" asked the Anbu. Replying with a drawing of Murcielago, an enemy, the Anbu lunged towards him, slapping his sword. In a barrage of sparks, Ulquiorra struck his. There was a clash of steel, but it was not audible outside the camp in the still night. The ninja withdrew and made a feint towards Ulquiorra's head by twisting the blade around and around. Ulquiorra retaliated with a lightning fast thrust at his neck, swatting aside the attack. The man spun the blade at Ulquiorra's thigh while he ducked and swerved. Ignoring the slight pain, Ulquiorra let the blow land and let the hierro do its job. With a countermove, he stabbed the man in the skull. Once more dodging and kicking him back, the Anbu flew through the seals to initiate a jutsu. Hacking at his hands, Ulquiorra interrupted, making him stop and block. Their steel clattered back and forth. Because Ulquiorra was fighting defensively, the man had to give him more time before Hinata could kill every guard that was dozing off. Ulquiorra's blade fell in such a vicious arc that the wood beneath was split neatly, causing the tower to rock as the Anbu dodged. The ninja's more shaky footing allowed him to employ more unconventional moves and land more blows. However, Ulquiorra countered that advantage with his own strength and dexterity, striking the man's sword with such force that it broke a foot away from the suka. But a shinobi's skill level meant that a shorter blade was just as effective as a longer one. Ulquiorra had to retreat as the Anbu, with its shorter blade, moved in close. But just as he turned to strike the ninja with a blow that would have severed his head in two, the Anbu shot forward, impaling him through the chest directly into the hollow hole. Ulquiorra looked down and noticed Hinata. She gestured with a bloody hand before jumping up behind the ninja, who turned to confront her. As he pulled the blade from her husband's chest, Hinata struck him in the thigh with a kunai. She gave him a sly smile. "You really think Ulquiorra-kun would fall to such an attack?" The man froze, startled, and looked up to see Ulquiorra's blade severing him in two, severing his left shoulder from his right hip. The two halves broke apart in a shower of red after an explosion of blood and gore. Hinata recoiled and took a step back. She was no longer at all comfortable killing her enemies. All she wanted was for herself to have paid closer attention during the lesson when the students were instructed on how to handle it. Ulquiorra studied their attire. "Good thing we brought spares." She gave a nod. When they examined the corpse, they discovered a scroll that gave them the command to find and kill anyone spreading Konoha or Taikoku sentiments. Hinata had discovered the camp's pay chest as well, and they had sealed it with a scroll. Ulquiorra punched the door, shattering it from the outside as they leapt over the wall. The next day, it would appear to all that someone had killed the guards and broken in. The Ashigaru's bodies were all arranged so that it appeared as though they had been ambushed and killed after a brief struggle. They looked over their work and then dove into the water. They came up behind the inn after swimming upriver, where the water removed the blood from their clothes. Unnoticed, Ulquiorra sanidoed them to the balcony and inside. They quickly undressed and concealed the evidence by enclosing their garments in a scroll. Ulquiorra had brought as many scrolls as she could, so there would be one for every possible use. Shivering from the cold and the unexplainable unpleasantness of killing, Hinata sighed and rubbed her arms. Ulquiorra noticed her unease and gave her a hug. She held him and sniffed. She met his eyes and said, "Hinata-chan, it's good you feel uncomfortable with killing. Only trash enjoy killing. Their minds are too primitive to understand better things and greater pleasures. And no matter what you think, you are not trash." She thanked her with a tiny smile and a kiss. Hinata blushed and said, Ulquiorra, I need to bathe. Could we call?" As Ulquiorra got ready for bed. She was not required to complete her request. He had flung open the door and glanced outside. He called for help because the noise level downstairs was still high. He asked for some hot water for the bath when a young woman entered the room. She gave a nod and quickly came back carrying a big pitcher of steaming water. Ulquiorra filled the bath, which was just big enough for 2 people, after making a few more trips. Ulquiorra turned and closed the door, thanking the girl. Hinata had no clothes on. He was astounded by her beauty when his filtered gaze revealed her true form. She had perfect skin. Her areolas were a deeper shade of pink, and her breasts were round and full. His gaze strayed to her stomach as her nipples started to harden. Her hips formed a soft curve that ended at her thighs, while her stomach was taut and sloping. A cloud of lavender hair hung at her groin. With her left arm folded beneath her breasts, her right arm timidly dangled at her side, inadvertently drawing attention to her body. Please, would you like to join me, you? Ulquiorra. Kun? Ulquiorra was proud of his ability to restrain himself. He was trying not to react as it was. Trying is the key word here. He struggled to decide whether to follow her or give in to her. The other part, though, was curled up and whispering that he shouldn't accept and that he wasn't ready. He was limited to staring at her with his pupils dilated and his breathing shallower than usual. He knew that, beneath his reserve, there was another aspect of his body that was not quite as tense. Hinata's eyes flickered between his eyes and his groin, her blush extending all the way down to her neck. Hinata-chan, you know that I am not ready. It was an obvious lie, I know. We don't have to do that. Just, I want your company. She wanted to lie with him, he knew that. Admittedly, he was also tempted to have sex, but he was uncomfortable with the thought. You are a terrible liar, Hinata-chan. She sighed as her gaze went to his. With a slow motion, she lowered her arms and faced the bath, getting into the hot water. The heat made her wince a little, but she still sat there with the steam swirling around her nude body. Her eyes were slightly wet as she grinned at him. All right. Yes, Ulquiorra. Kun, I want to make love to you. And I know you want it too. Please, she asked him. You don't have to be afraid anymore. Jiraiya could feel his pervert sense snapping. Oh. It has to be someone I know who is acting perversely. Ulquiorra and Hinata completed their personal hygiene routine. Ulquiorra had worked hard to keep Hinata from ever seeing his body again, and Hinata watched him wall himself up with a rather depressing expression. After it was all over, Hinata emerged from the bath first. Ulquiorra started to towel herself off, as did she. She was about to grab her yukata when her right wrist was caught in an iron grip that held her arm back. Simultaneously, a tight grasp took hold of her left hip. Ulquiorra's body was right behind her, pressing against her, causing her to feel his arousal. She turned to look into his heavy eyes out of instinct. She looked at him, feeling her own arousal. Hinata-chan, understand that I know next to nothing about sexual matters. They both dropped their towels as she reached up to kiss him. She smiled and said, that's okay. I'll give you the odd pointer. The kiss quickly became savage. He moaned into Ulquiorra's kiss as her tongue took control of his. Her hand reached up over her stomach and closed around her breast. He ran his hand over the globe gently, squeezing the soft flesh until his fingers found a nub in the center. He lowered his head and licked and kissed the joint between her collarbone and neck until she gasped and broke the kiss. He made teeth marks on the skin by sinking his teeth into it. He could feel the instinctive hollow need to procreate growing. He was aware that the Vasto lords in Arrancar were the victims of an odd phenomenon when they mated, even though he had never experienced it before. Their attitude turned more beastly, and their teeth grew longer to mark their partner. To maintain a tighter grip during intercourse, the nails also sharpened. But he was aware that this was a serious issue. When hollow mating happened, it hurt if the partners had different levels of power. One could injure the other with ease. He knew he would have to restrain his impulses because he would not harm Hinata. In part. Releasing her wrist, his right hand descended to her pubic hair. His left hand curled and rubbed her breast, his fingers locking onto her hard nipple as she moaned. As his right index finger traced her outer labia, she gasped once more. Her right hand slid down to his now fully erect length as she leaned back into him. He hissed as she curled her fingers around the hard flesh and moved her hand up and down, dragging her fingernails along his skin. She watched with heavy-lidded eyes as his long pale teeth picked at her neck. His digits initiated circling her nipple, caressing the solidified tissue prior to squeezing the core. She groaned at the pain, Ease up a little. He looked down at his clipped nails and did nothing more than caress her breast with the pads of his fingers. Gathering the moisture her body released, her other hand curled and caressed the soft flesh of her core, while his index finger caressed the inside of her heat. His finger pierced her tender flesh, causing her to tremble and emit high-pitched groans that sent a chill down his spine. Her own hand started to speed up and coil around him in the meantime. When her hand bottomed out, it tickled against his hair. When it reached his manhood, she rubbed her fingers across the hair and tugged at the skin. Every time her attentions became too great, his breath became labored and his eyes fluttered shut. His hands trembled and shook, and he started to groan. His assistance came to a complete stop. She gave him a cheek kiss with a cunning smile. She turned, still caressing his member as she started to kiss his neck, her tiny teeth leaving tiny, barely perceptible marks on the iron hard skin. She grinned up at him as she slid down his chest. Her face was right across from his hole, he noticed. Hinata. He was unable to complete in time. She stuck her tongue into the hole and slithered her head forward. With shyness, it darted inside, causing him to tremble and release a sharp gasp of pleasure from his throat. With a delicate precision, she traced the edge of the hole with her small pink muscle. She continued to lick the hollow hole, and he growled again, his hands rising to her head and sinking into her hair. His arousal increased even more as his whole body trembled with pleasure. He started and groaned again as Hinata suddenly started to bite at the edge of the hole. With Hinata clinging to him, he leaned back and collapsed onto the bed, leaving her to continue sucking on the edge of the hole. He gritted his teeth and grimaced, uncharacteristically, and sweat dropped from his brow. At last, Hinata paused and descended, caressing and licking his stomach. Her eyes flitted down to his manhood, then her blush deepened and a tiny smile spread across her face. Just in time to witness Hinata kneel in front of him and start to lick, Ulquiorra recovered. He sighed and started to shake. She moved her left hand forward, cupped his testicles, and held the orbs in her paw, rubbing it back and forth and running her nails over the delicate skin. Her mouth settled over his head and her right hand moved up and down along his length. She moved her tongue around and around the tip, using the small pink muscle to peel back the skin and smear it with her saliva. She pulled her head back and gave the head a smile. It was slightly darker than the rest of his body, with a pale gray color. With pure lust in his eyes, he gazed down at her, his manhood quivering in her grasp. Her hands came off and she placed them on his knees. "You. Ulquiorra. Kun, have you heard of this one?" He let out a groan. "What?" Ulquiorra leaned forward and took a few inches into her mouth, her eyes widening as she said, "This." Leaning forward and hunching over her with pleasure, he shivered. She circled the hardened muscle on his length with her tongue. She gave a slight cough at the intrusion, the unexpected stimulation sending a shiver of pleasure through Ulquiorra. Tightly gripping his knees, she slid a little bit lower. Ulquiorra reached up and grabbed her hair. Hinata shook her head, breathing in short gasps every now and then before lowering her head once more. She smiled around the organ in her mouth as he moaned once more. She shook her head left and right as she rocked back and forth. Suddenly, she was happy that she had attended the unique kunoichi sexual and seduction classes. At last, she lowered her head to fully enclose Ulquiorra in her mouth and started to vomit. With haste, he took off his hands, and she fell back, panting for breath, saliva dribbling from her mouth and his organ. With a series of long, jagged gasps, she nodded to him, leaned forward, and swallowed everything. She groaned as he tickled the back of her throat, sending shivers of ecstasy up his body. It was the tipping point for someone with his level of inexperience. "Hinata. Chan," he called out. "I'm." He trembled and gave another snarling gasp. His cock trembled and seized. With wide eyes, Hinata swallowed as quickly as she could. She took a step back, gasping and clearing her throat. Though slightly salty, his flavor was agreeable. Gazing up at him, she let out a sigh. "Coming?" She asked him to finish. The look on his face almost made her laugh out loud. She used crude language, which shocked him. She rose to her feet and rolled onto him, resting on top of him. They started kissing once more, and Ulquiorra detected a faint trace of himself on her tongue. With his tongue gliding down her neck and leaving a love bite, he rolled them both over. Before settling over her chest, he dragged his teeth down the valley of her breasts. He pressed his lips to her right nipple and began to suck at the rough skin. He gently tugged at her body, pulling up and away as he rolled his tongue over the nub. Opening his mouth wide, he bit down into her warm body, holding it in place with his teeth as he swallowed as much of the large, heavy globe as he could. His wife gave him hard gasps and pulled her pants as his tongue kept stroking his areola and nipple. It was sensual enough to do this to her, but it was made even more intense by the fact that she was his maid and wife. No one else would ever treat her in this way. She let out a gasp, Ulquiorra. Kun. I thought you said you didn't, ah. It was a rhetorical question, of course. If the noises she made were not an indication, and he was not stupid enough to assume that, he could feel her own arousal against his groin. I may not have any skill personally, he leaned back and kissed her again. However, it felt good when you did this to me. Why? Yes. Good. He went back to his work on her breasts, sucking on her left teat this time. He bit and sucked on the big sweet globe as he ran his tongue around her nipple once more. He reached underneath her and pulled her up, engulfing her in his arms while he gouged out her juicy breasts. Her body tasted and smelled delicious. A salty aftertaste appeared on his lips as sweat started to trickle over her body. Her gasps increased in volume and height as her hands became tangled in his hair. The air was heavy with the scent of arousal and sweetness. He lowered her back to the bed gradually and knelt on the floor, slipping between her thighs. He placed his head on her inner thigh, causing her lower lips to become drenched and puffed. He started biting and kissing the skin, making tiny punctures. He scraped the skin as he moved his teeth over her flesh. His hands tracing the backs of her thighs, he moved between each one of them. At last, he reached the hairline between her legs and planted a kiss on the skin near her lips. With a gasp, Hinata turned her hips to face him. Ignoring it, he kept running his tongue over her outer lips. He started to nibble closer to her center, his own tongue a dark gray that contrasted with her body's peach color and the pink of her heat. Ulquiorra approached her clitoris, running his tongue up her slit. She began to gasp more loudly as he circled it and lapped at the little piece of flesh, bucking her hips in his direction to get closer to him. Observing her enjoyment, he moved his tongue in a circular motion around her weeping aperture, then resumed licking the weeping opening in an attempt to maintain her satisfaction. She let out a small cry as he stuck his tongue in her thighs and she closed them around his head. He tasted her sweet nectar as he licked inside her. Her taste was inexplicable to him, but he could live off of it for the rest of his days. She moaned huskily, Ulquiorra. Kun, please, carry on. He accelerated without responding. He licked up and down inside her, pausing when he sensed something blocking his path. He pulled her tongue away from her hymen and licked and sucked at the nub just above her center. A few minutes later, she was moaning once more as her hands tightened around his hair. She tried to say, I'm, but a scream interrupted her as she approached. As Ulquiorra sucked down the liquid she let out a gasp and groaned while riding her orgasm. He watched her intently as he licked the moisture from his face and lips. She sat up and said, Wow. Ulquiorra. Kun, you're great. He stood up so they could kiss once more, with her tasting herself on his tongue and lips as he had just tasted himself. You have no frame of reference for that statement. And I'll never need one, she said as she gave him another kiss and stroked his fully extended penis. You, Ulquiorra. Kun, do why? You want to? To? She said, gazing into his emerald eyes as she proceeded to caress his body. Yes, Hinata. Chan. With a nod, she reclined, her hair cascading around her as if he were holding her above her, his hands resting on either side of her head as his eyes soaked up her beauty. She whimpered, P. Please be gentle, as he moved his hard member up and down her tear duct. Though he didn't really trust himself to talk, he nodded. He positioned himself at her doorway and bent over, resting his body on her warm, velvety breasts. She spread her legs wider, and as he moved slowly inside her, their lips met. It took him only a few inches to feel her hymen. He entered her, causing tears to well up in her eyes. He remained motionless for a brief instant before hurriedly moving forward. Leaning back, he lifted his body above her, allowing him to gaze down at her. Her lips quivered with pleasure and pain, and a trickle of blood moved from their joined bodies. Tears poured from her eyes. Even though he knew he was harming her, he still wanted to keep this scene in his memory, the instant he took his wife and made her his complete mate. He pressed it into his mind, then leaned back and kissed her, controlling her mouth while he waited for her to get used to having him in her. She nodded to him as her legs curved around his waist and her arms raised to encircle his torso. He moved slowly at first, thrusting forward and backward, pulling back until he was only halfway in. His wife let out mewls of ecstasy, and he moved in slow, steady thrusts, relishing the warmth and slippery wetness of her body while growling with pleasure. Beneath him, she trembled and shivered, her hands playing with the hollow hole as they moved up to the center of his back. Ulquiorra's growls became more intense as he accelerated and exerted more forceful thrusts. He growled and bit her collar as her mewls became louder and louder and she dipped her hands deeper into the hollow hole. His hollow desires started to grow. She was his partner. To give her the most pleasure possible, he had to breed her as best he could. He picked up the pace and kissed her again, trying to find the ideal angle to give her pleasure while fucking her as hard as he could and pushing inside her as deeply as he could. He eased up on his assault after hearing her sob in agony, but he soon resumed when she cried out, "I'm fine, Ulquiorra. Kun. Please, fuck me." The coarse language and sarcasm with which she spoke still surprised him. Before turning his attention back to more urgent issues, he decided to ask her about that. "As you wish, Hinata." Chan. As he started mating with her again, Hinata gave a low, pitched shriek. Her hands just held on for dear life, not moving from his hollow hole. As he shifted angles, she gasped louder and louder until he found a spot that sent a shiver of pleasure through her body and let out a much louder cry. He aimed for the location he knew by memory and kept pushing. He repeatedly felt his cock strike the right place, giving them pleasurable shivers down their spines. He leaned in and started massaging her clitoris to arouse her even more. She begged him to release inside her, pleading for him to move faster and harder, her words growing more and more vulgar and profane. Leaning back, he gazed down at her. Sweat was streaming off her body and mingling with his as her breasts heaved. Her hands were knotted in the bed linens, her eyes heavy shut, her breath laboring, and her cheeks flushed bright red from having released her grip on her husband. With a ragged breath, he lowered his hands and cupped her buttocks. He raised her and drew her in close, allowing her to sit on his lap. He resumed thrusting, taking one of her breasts in his mouth and sucking as Hinata stroked his head. The air filled with the sound of skin slapping together and her moaning. He hissed, his body tensing, "Hinta, I'm close." She pleaded, "Inside. Inside. Please. Give me your seed. Give it to your wife." That was enough to push it over the edge, causing his body to tremble as he let go of her and pushing her over the edge as well, their last cry blending together like their bodies. With their limbs still entwined, they lay together, building up their strength. It was a very happy moment, in addition to giving them the most enjoyable experience either had ever had. It was the last act of their protracted love that sealed their union as husband and wife. And that meant the world to Ulquiorra and Hinata. "Hinata, why did you speak like that?" She shrugged, flushed. "It just sort of happened." That made him furrow his brow. "Well," she leaned in to give him a kiss on the lips. Thank you, you. Ulquiorra. Kun." He pulled her in close, giving her a firm hold. "Thank you too, Hinata. Chan." Even though the rest of the place was still noisy, the newlyweds' breakfast was a very quiet affair. The camp massacre was the main topic of discussion. Ulquiorra and Hinata only occasionally spoke with the owner, staying mostly out of the larger discussion. It appears that the attack was carried out by approximately 20 individuals breaking in. They got the occasional strange glance, but nothing more than anyone else, so they weren't worried. A short while later, right after they were done, they were packing in their room. Fearful of an attack, all the travelers and businessmen were fleeing. Ulquiorra and Hinata had made the same decision and had gone with the throng. After they were done, they thanked the man for a nice stay, paid the bill, and departed. They followed the throng into the forest to the west before splitting off and heading north. They continued for about an hour in order to keep others in the crowd at bay. After they were out of sight, Ulquiorra and Hinata sat down and reopened the map, removing the tower they had passed. The communicator beeped as they were deciding how to proceed. Hinata gave him a quick glance before reaching inside her jacket. The headset consisted of a pair of earbuds connected to an unusual gem that stored chakras within a metal casing. One could communicate farther with the gem the more chakra they put into it. With her tenketsu limited by the henge, Hinata had been pouring as much chakra into it as she could. Hello? Yo, how ya doin'? Hello, Anko. So, how's the honeymoon? Oh. So, how big is he? Hinata? She's had a minor hemorrhage. Can I help? Ah. So, how was it? Beautiful. Wow. Never thought I'd hear you say that. What do you want? Well, Tsunade sent a message, demanding our return, your loyalty to Konoha and the trade deal between the southern nations disbanded. How should we reply? Ya know, beyond saying, no, go fuck a skunk. Ulquiorra paused to reflect. Send a strong message. Demand that both Konoha and Hai no Taikoku remove themselves from business that doesn't concern them. The next time they send a message it will be an ultimatum of war. Okay. Then, send that message back with the messenger's head and the word, if. Goody, goody. See ya later. Give her a spank from me. Ulquiorra snorted as he looked down at the deactivated communicator. Ridiculous woman. He took one last look at Hinata. When all was said and done, he was having a great honeymoon. Ulquiorra caressed the hair on Hinata's forehead and his eyes fell to her mouth. He could still clearly recall the words she had cried out to him. In her unconscious state, his wife wriggled and moaned his name once more. He thanked Ryo Sama in silence for giving them another chance. He sat there silently, waiting for Hinata to wake up. She muttered, right there, Ulquiorra Sama, just before she did so. A sensual dream? Probably not. She should be content for the time being with our past misadventures. Waking up blearily, Hinata wiped the blood from her nose. She gave a small, eep, sound upon seeing him, then turned her face red and looked away. He questioned, what did Anko say to you? Nothing. You suffered a large nosebleed from her words. That implies she said something to warrant such a reaction. She skirted the question, well, what did she want? He kept staring at her with a level gaze. She asked me how big you are, she blushed and put her fingertips together. Ulquiorra gave a nod and cocked his head slightly in irritation. He got to his feet and assisted her in standing up, saying, she always seems to ask the aggravating questions. Are you all right now? Why? Yes, Ulquiorra. Kun. Where are we going next? There's a shinobi fort about 10 kilometers northwest. We shall attack and destroy it. So soon? She asked him, her eyes worried. We both need as much rest as possible for the campaign to work properly. Is that possible if we simply run around blowing places up? She's got a point. Most enemies are easily dispatched, but neither of us can afford to expose ourselves to the full power of the Hai and Akatsuki forces. Hinata also faced other serious risks in addition to the possibility of running out of power and being captured if they did that. Iwa and Kumo would both go for the Byakugan if it were found that a main house Hyuga was chasing after her. To make matters worse, there was a chance that their relationship would result in her getting pregnant. That meant he would probably have to walk her back to Kiri since he didn't think a fetus could survive Sonido and didn't want to put his wife or kid in danger. For a moment he wondered if he should give her back. Even so, she would never accept it. Without my protection, she would soon follow me, and he would not have that. Well, what would you suggest? She paused, her lips pressed together. I would say we continue to attack the smaller targets. It would give credence to the idea of a small guerrilla force causing chaos. That should make the Konoha and Hano no Taikoku commanders believe that there is no major risk to the forts. They'll probably think that it's just a ragtag group. Plus, if we do that, it will spread attention wider, and that might spread forces wider. Ulquiorra gave a nod. A good plan. The compliment made her smile. Thanks, Ulquiorra. Kun. I've been hanging around Shikamaru a lot. Ulquiorra held out his hand. With that, Hinata gave him a cheek kiss. They disappeared with a sonido. With a sigh, Jiraiya took a seat, his muscles tensing at the little movement. The two Konoha. Nin stood between Kei's no Kuni and the area that had once been Taki no Kuni. They had set such a harsh pace that Iruka was wheezing. Even though they had made every effort to use their Shunshin no Jutsu, they were still extremely exhausted and it took them more than a week to arrive. After a rather unpleasant encounter with some Konoha Nin, Jiraiya took care of them right away. Iruka had also contributed, his animosity towards the village giving his blows greater force. Following the brief but violent altercation, they continued to run, leaving no signs of their presence. Iruka was afraid that Tsunade would look over the corpses and find Jiraiya was not as reclusive as he had previously claimed to be. Following the execution, Jiraiya departed from the village and swore, akin to Tsunade, to never go back to Konoha. Several times the Slug Sannin had attempted to talk to him, but he had just gone to Mount Myoboku and remained there, save for the occasional excursion into the everyday world. In fact, he had published a few volumes in other countries, but no new edition of Icha Icha had been published within Hano no Taikoku. The protagonist was now a half-demon who went in search of his departed love. It seems that the boy was very well liked. Tsunade had been frantic to win her teammate's return. Being a devoted fan of Icha Icha, she'd sent Kakashi to talk to him. Kakashi was sent back with the instructions to destroy all copies he had on him and to ensure that no one sold them to him. He was also told that if he ever attempted to purchase one, he would remove them completely from Hano no Taikoku. It goes without saying that Kakashi was intimidated and had to obtain fresh copies of the Icha Icha from other shinobi who had purchased them. To get Kakashi back to his best, Tsunade had to swear that he would never allow Jiraiya to keep his word. If he followed through on the threat, she had even promised to allow Kakashi to go on a special covert mission to another village to get new Icha Icha. Tsunade had sent various other pleas afterward until he retreated to Mount Myoboku. She had even promised him unlimited access to all of the women's hot springs, changing rooms, and other facilities. She had even suggested a date, attempting to capitalize on his enduring interest in her. Nothing was successful. Jiraiya soothed Iruka by stating, Tsunade wouldn't be sent these bodies. She only sees the people in the Konoha hospital and those important to Konoha and Hano no Taikoku. I doubt she'll see these bodies. Plus, she's never examined the bodies of the people I've killed with the Rasengan. She might make a guess that it was me, but she'll be unable to say for sure. We have the advantage of surprise for now. And how long do you think we'll hold that advantage? Jiraiya gave a shrug. Hopefully, until we find the Jinchuriki. Whoever the hell he is. A few days after submitting the request, Tsunade gazed down at Kiri's response. She hissed silently in rage and ground her teeth. Did the southern nations have the audacity to take her on? She let out an annoyed sigh. Jiraiya remained uncommunicative, Akatsuki remained at large, Tsuchi, Kaminari no Kuni, and their villages were preparing for war, and now the southern nations dared to defy the Hano no Taikoku's orders. Unaware of the person they were debating with? She was thinking of sending the special assets to destroy them, but not quite. That would be showing their hand too soon, though. A knock on the door prompted Danzo to come in, followed by Hiyashi. The Hyuga had a more stern expression than before, his face expressionless and his eyes ablaze. He snarled, their response? Tsunade raised the missive. Godem Hokage. Your demands seem odd to us. We need to know why you believe you are entitled to meddle in matters that are not your concern. It is baseless of you to demand Ulquiorra be returned. His friends include the daimyo, hidden villages and leaders of Land of Dust, the remains of Rorin, Kei's no Kuni, Ishi no Kuni, Kuma no Kuni, Tori no Kuni, Suna no Kuni, Subaku no Kuni, Same no Kuni, Sengo no Kuni, Kujiara no Kuni, Kairyu no Kuni, Teiko no Kuni, and Fun no Kuni. It is not your business, but ours to transact. Nothing will prevent this deal from being in our best interests. Regarding your request, the people who have joined Ulquiorra have made the decision to stay here. Especially Hyuga Hinata is reluctant to divorce her husband. What? Give us a reason to accept your demands the next time you send them. The Southern Alliance Council. You don't expect me to leave my daughters there? They'll be bred for the Byakugan. We cannot allow that. Danzo remained silent. A faint smile tugged at his lip corners. War appeared to be the only choice. The unique resources were almost prepared. Everything was starting to come together. We don't. It'll be worse leaving Hinata there. They'll have children with Hyuga DNA and his own. Can you imagine the southern nations possessing that? Tsunade gasped. We'll make the ultimatum. She extended her hand, pulled a blank letter in her direction, and started to write. The Southern Alliance Council. We must once more ask that our nuclear ninjas be returned, even though we respect your private conversations with each other. If not, we would not hesitate to declare war on the entire Southern Alliance. Tsunade Senju and Hokage Godem. Ulquiorra and Hinata were perched on the edge of a cliff overlooking their next intended victim, concealed by the branches of a tree. The base was essentially the same as their previous target, with the exception that it was under observation with the sun overhead at noon. A wooden barrier encircled several tents and a watchtower. The base was perched atop a hill, and a path connected the gates to a small town and the river that meandered below. Ulquiorra cast a quick glance at Hinata, who gave a nod and used her Byakugan to let go of the henge and unleash her full fighting power. Silently, they leapt to their feet. Ulquiorra made a spectacular landing on top of the tower, his speed sending a ripple of energy through the building that broke it and scattered wooden shrapnel everywhere, tearing apart a few men and crushing those beneath the heavy wood beneath the structure. He rode the collapsing structure down, using the flat of his hand to decapitate a stunned officer. With grace, Hinata touched the ground and dispatched her adversaries, causing their organs to burst and be crushed by her Hokuto Shinken, causing them to cough up blood as they fell. She turned on her feet and charged the gates, tapping the Ashigaru's skull along the way to send a chakra pulse exploding in his skull. When she arrived at the gates just as they were opening, she dodged the katana that was aimed at her and, with a single kick, her Hokuto Shinken broke the man's ribs and punctured his lungs. As the others rushed her, she turned to face them after landing back on her feet and flicking a kunai into the throat of another man. Just a little closer, she told herself, trying to slow her heartbeat. Her hands made a smooth arc as they approached. Shugohaki Rokuhuian Sho. With a burst of air, the enormous dome containing the razor. Sharp blades shot out of her hands. The men screamed in agony as their limbs and appendages were severed from their bodies. Some of them died at the scene after being sliced into 2 or more pieces. The others soon followed them. Byakugan Hinata alerted her to the approaching horsemen who wanted to flee to the town in order to get help. She could only avoid them because they were too close. A spear was aimed at her chest, but she dodged it by jumping to the side. As she rolled onto the hard surface, she observed Ulquiorra occupied with combating the remaining Ashigaru, unable to pursue the cavalryman. He tore the head off a man's shoulders and gave her a quick look. He pulled out his sword and threw it across to her as soon as he saw the issue. After giving a single nod, he struck someone's head. Just before she caught his blade, Hinata experienced a surge of pride in his belief in her abilities. She felt a rush of cold as her hands curled around the green tsuka. Although Murcielago was heavy in her hands, she felt as though it was a natural extension of herself, a new limb that fit just right. All of a sudden, she realized that Ulquiorra was the only reason she could wield it. She recalled what he had said about his Zanpakuto. A small piece of his soul had transformed and hardened into a blade. This was a part of him, and she knew it as her hands became extremely cold. A faint murmur reached her ears as she spun around, using her ninja sprint to pursue the cavalry, who was still hidden from the town's view. A whisper of skill reached her ears, a murmur that instructed her on the proper way to kill with a blade, where to strike, and how. Although she would have preferred Hokuto Shinken, that would have presented a challenge because her opponents rode horses. She bolted after them, catching up quickly. As the final man pivoted, she vaulted over his steed and continued running, while he slid out of his saddle, a crimson stream emanating from his armored neck. She moved quickly and dispatched the next man. The final 2 riders picked up more speed on their horses, but a skillfully aimed kunai took the lead, and the final man pivoted and lifted his spear, repeatedly jabbing it at her. She ducked under the blows and bobbed before launching herself forward and severing his thigh and throat. Leaping back, she cast her eyes over the horses. They weren't in the town yet, but she knew they would be shortly, and when the horses were discovered, that would cause problems for them. She turned and hurried back to the base, cursing. After eliminating the final survivor, Ulquiorra raised an eyebrow at her. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine, but the horses are nearly at the town. They'll come to investigate soon." He gave a nod. "We should search the base quickly." Other than a sizable map that showed several supply routes and the plans for the impending invasions, they didn't find anything particularly interesting. He took it and put it in a different scroll. "Shall we enter the town?" She gave a headshake. "I'd say we hold up in the forest for a day or 2, then enter, so as not to draw attention." Plus, we're unlikely to get trouble if we go through the screening the security will put up. They'll just think we're travelers. Very well. A few days later, Saito Shiro and his wifekin arrived and encountered strict security. There were town militia everywhere, brandishing a jumble of weaponry, from kitchen knives affixed to wooden staves to katanas and other swords. A good number of Ashigaru were also present, and they were all on guard. The man who had asked them recorded what they had said, explaining that they were just two ordinary newlyweds traveling across Hano no Taikoku in order to avoid two unpleasant parents. They secured lodging in a dimly lit room of a small inn. A few days later, Mei sat at her desk, looking from Inuzuka Hana to Hyuga Akio. The pair belonged to the delegation dispatched by the embassy, comprising approximately 12 officials and ninja under the guidance of a Jonin. Akio was only deterred from activating the Byakugan by the threat of dismemberment, and Hana was sniffing the air. The two appeared quite agitated. Mei pondered whether their search for their family was for their own comfort or for Konoha's advantage. She read the letter, then took a quick peek at Anko's account of Ulquiorra's remarks. She looked up at them with a sly smile. I see. Well, we appear to be at an impasse. The foremost Jonin scowled. How so, Mizukage? The problem is that those in question have revoked their loyalty to Konohagakure no Sato and have instead decided to become ninja of Kirigakure and of our newly created Southern Alliance. As such, I am not going to hand over loyal ninja of Kiri, she said, ignoring the lack of respect in his tone and the omission of Sama, though a small tick appeared on her brow. Her mouth thinned with frustration at the uproar of objections. She massaged her temple and endured the uproar of opposition. Mizukage, I demand you hand over the nuke. Nin. They are no longer nuke. Nin, they are Kiri. Nin. Many are members of important clans. Be that as it may, unless you are going to offer me something of equal value for them, this discussion is over. They are now important clan members of Kiri. Reluctantly, the Konoha delegation fell silent when the lead Jonin held up his hand for it. Mizukage, you are aware that this will lead to a war between Kiri and Konoha? Mei stood with her fists on her desk, scowling at him. Oh, so you demand our citizens be handed over to you like trade goods, and the moment we say no, you threaten us. Interesting. An additional envoy raised their voice. Mizukage, your village stands no hope against Hano no Taikoku. She gave them a confused look and said, Hano no Taikoku? Oh, so this is amusing. Her smile was dark. I was under the impression this would be a war between Kiri and Konoha. I fail to see what we've done to piss of the high daimyo. Enlighten me. For a brief moment, Akio and Hana exchanged glances while the others became silent, too shocked to react. She turned her back on them and nodded, saying, no? All right then. Well then. You've got what you want. I'm glad you've seen sense, Mizukage, someone replied. They felt uneasy as Mei turned around and grinned sinisterly. The Jonin said, we'll take back our nuke. Nin. Would you call them in? The nuke. Nin? I meant war. The lead ambassador and the Jonin moved forward as the group paused. We demand that you hand them over, or else war will be declared. She nodded as she cast a quick glance toward the room's darkest corner. The head ambassador and Jonin hesitated for a moment before a kunai materialized in their hands, the steel swiftly approaching her throat. Well, I suppose there's nothing better going on. War it is. She whirled, using the cuffs of her sleeves to push them aside as her hands broke through a pair of seals. Futon. Komu no Jutsu. The lead ambassador and Jonin fell instantly, their screams quickly silenced by the fog that quickly burned them to the bone. As the ambassadors started to panic and scream, 12 ninjas with drawn swords suddenly descended. One yelled, "You'll pay for this, Kiri slut." A big tick showed up on Mei's forehead as her mouth moved to an angry smile. The offending woman was chopped down by a ninja. At her words, the southern daimyo entered, with the exception of Kei's and Mizu. Now, I know the letter said war with the entire Southern Alliance. As such, allow me to introduce you to the council. They had been waiting outside, talking about the new Fun no Kuni ship designs, which were enormous dreadnoughts that resembled floating fortresses more than actual ships. They had been anticipating this signal as a show of support. They nodded in agreement when I asked, "Now, are you comfortable with the idea of war?" "Okay. Now we are at war. Escort the ambassadors to the Konoha suite and make sure they send the letter. After that, post guards and lock them in. She gave me a big smile. It was going to get interesting. Ulquiorra and Hinata were in bed together at the same time, with Ulquiorra pushing upward on her hips and hearing her loud moans as he sucked on one of her breasts. When she reached her peak, Ulquiorra let out a low scream and she let out another loud moan, resting her head on his shoulder. With a sigh of pleasure, Hinata leaned back and slipped off to lie next to him. Ulquiorra stayed seated in their compact mattress. The room was cozy and compact, located on the third floor of the inn. There was a small balcony outside, and several lanterns lit the space to provide light after dusk. They entered the town with little difficulty, receiving only a few strange looks because of his sword. They had rested in their room after that, going out only to eat and shop for supplies and other necessities. Apart from that, all they had done was engage in sexual activity as frequently as they could. Ulquiorra and Hinata had experimented with different positions, with her sitting in his lap and her legs wrapped around his waist as he had relentlessly entered her. Hinata liked the more romantic positions, the standard missionary, for example, where they could kiss more readily, while Ulquiorra had found he preferred the more savage positions, which allowed him to penetrate her deeper. He assumed it came with the territory of being an Arankar and a former Jinchuriki. Their hands continued to move over each other's bodies even when he had to take occasional breaks. Hinata groaned as he put on his clothes once more. "Where are you going now, Ulquiorra? Kun? We should move to our next target tomorrow, so I was going to get the last of what we need." With a sigh, she nodded. After a little while, she said, "1 minute." And got dressed. Both were dressed in traditional peasant clothing and long traveling cloaks this time. After descending the stairs, they emerged into the town. They made their way to the marketplace, with the tailors in their sights. As uninitiated travelers, Hinata had noted that it was questionable if a large amount of blood was found on them. There was only so much clothing they could carry with them. If they were to go on, they would require more. After entering the tailors, Ulquiorra waited in the main area of the shop while Hinata made her selections and went to a separate room to change. These kinds of clothing stores appeared to be fairly common in towns. In the more developed cities and the villages, which were the most developed areas in the elemental nations, workers and tailors could create custom clothing, and if not, they mass-produced standard clothing using looms and a large workforce. Ulquiorra approached his size and took a quick look at it. After selecting several shirts and pants, he paid for them. He waited for a few minutes, periodically glancing up at the changing areas. After a while, a somewhat anxious looking Hinata emerged, rushing to pay for the clothing. "We need to go," she growled as she dragged him outside onto the crowded street. "What's wrong?" "I just remembered. Konoha has been sending special Anbu and route teams to this area recently, each one containing a Hyuga. They'll see straight through the henge if they activate their Byakugan and we'll be found." "Why have they been sending these teams?" "Something about finding a special asset." "Is it likely they'll send a team while we're here?" "The attack will have already been reported. We can't stay here." He gave a nod. "We'll pay for the inn and head off." He sanidoed them away to a new location deep in the forest and far from any prying eyes after they paid for the room, so they left the town and hid in the forest. Ulquiorra intended to depart shortly since they were getting too close to Konoha for his comfort, and they were still in central Hano no Taikoku. With a sigh, Hinata took a seat. "Ulquiorra. Kun, I want to ask you something." "Yes." She answered, "Well. When are we going to attack Akatsuki?" In response to his inquiring look. "Well, so far, we've only been attacking Konoha. I know we have a lot still to do, but if Akatsuki has all the Biju, shouldn't we be targeting them?" Ulquiorra studied her for a long moment before answering. "My plan is to carry on harassing Konoha so they'll devote more of their forces to finding the guerrilla force. That'll make it more likely we'll be the ones to defeat Akatsuki." She gave a nod. "So, how long will that take?" "We've spent a little under 2 weeks to get this far. I would say we keep it up for another month and—" "You, Ulquiorra. Kun," she shakily interjected. "W. Why don't we simply cast aside the disguises?" "W. Well, I mean, sooner or later, people will find Saito Shiro and Saito Kin in the towns where the attacks have been happening. Why don't we simply go all out?" Ulquiorra remained silent for a short while before answering. That plan has its merits, and it does make sense. However, it is not in my nature to be so reckless. Still, he shifted his gaze. When we know war is declared, we shall swap from our more cautious approach for a more reckless assault. She remained silent for a minute before responding, okay. I have to say, I did not expect that you would be more inclined to a reckless approach. I always remember you as a more cautious person. And you said earlier that the plan was acceptable. She gave a shrug. After you left, I threw myself into my training, trying to become stronger in your memory. I was planning to kill my father, the council, Tsunade and Sasuke. So, she breathed a deep breath. I had to remove my cautious attitude so that I could do so. I couldn't hesitate when the time came. And, well, I've thought about it, and won't it cause more fear and chaos when they learn the attacks or the actions of only two people? He gave a nod, admiring her bravery and strategy. I see. Thank you. She gave him a smile and a nod. She reached into one of the packs and pulled out a tiny sushi filled bento. Ulquiorra joined her as she started to eat, offering him some as well. She continued speaking after a while. Why? You remember we talked about children? Yes. We agreed on 4. She nodded, yes, and beckoned him over. He listened to her while seated next to her. It just came to me. What about Sakura and Sho? What about them? I'll liberate Sho and kill Haruno. She took a deep breath and brought him close to her in an intense hug. Promise me, if Sho gets pregnant by the Teme, you won't kill it. He scowled. Why do you ask? It is her choice as to the baby. Well, sometimes the caged bird seal is modified so that the bearer is compatible with only one person. She gave a sad look. In other words, they can only impregnate or be impregnated by that one person. And you fear that Sho has suffered that fate, and been bound to the Uchiha? Yes. I would not put it past the council. The Byakugan and Sharingan are both descended from a shared ancestor. One of the sons of the Rakudo Sennin. Ulquiorra's gaze grew wide. You're a descendant of the Rakudo Sennin? Yes. So are you. Pardon? The Uchiha come from the elder son. Eventually, the clan split to form the Uchiha and Hyuga. Or so I've heard. Anyway, from the younger son, the Senju and Uzumaki descended. So, I'm part of a clan? He looked at her and said, nobody told you? I mean, the third Hokage never said anything? No. No doubt he withheld it from me to keep the council of his back. Or he simply didn't care. The third wasn't like that. He was. He could have told me, or at least tell me that I had a family. As far as I know, my family abandoned me to be abused. Karen is the only Uzumaki I've come across. She stopped talking and squeezed his hand gently. Perhaps you could get to know her a bit better then. She is family after all. He sighed. Following their meal, they got up and left. If she wants to keep the child, she may. If she wants it dead, I shall oblige her. With a growl, Karen threw the scalpel towards the operating table. Damn it all to hell. A surgeon tasked with assisting her cast a sidelong glance at the Zetsu. When its body was cut open, the enormous mass of muscles that made up the creature's internal organs and strange heart were visible. What is it, Uzumaki? San? He quickly retreated as she unleashed yet another round of vicious curses. Everyone in the lab had learned to fear her because of her extreme temper. This was her 4th body that she had worked on. Each time she completed one, she would lose her temper. When Suigetsu had visited here previously, he had left with a shattered jaw. To heal it, he had liquefied, but Karen was given a restraining order. At her words, the body started to crumble and turn into mulch, resembling the fallen dead autumn leaves. These Zetsus are insane. Every time Well, look. Test subject 4, disintegrated, the surgeon wrote on a clipboard, muttered. With a growl, Karen strode off, taking off her gloves and settling into a tiny chair. With a sigh, she massaged her jaw. Well, that settles it. Could you go and organize a meeting with the Mizukage? These findings are interesting. With a nod, the physician took off his own gloves and walked out. With a sigh, she moved to the next table. Well, I've got to say. You're in better shape than I thought. Akio gave her a scowl. His jaw was restrained by another loop of cloth, and his chest and left arm were covered in bandages. No need to look like that. I've checked your seal. You're lucky you're even breathing, let alone able to think. Still, thanks for saving Hanabi. He choked out, what did you expect me to do? She's a member of the main house. I'm sworn to her. After escaping from their hiding place among the ambassadors, another ninja attempted to abduct Hanabi. The caged bird seal, however, served as a warning system. When a main house Hyuga was in danger, a signal was sent to the closest branch member asking them to come assist. Akio had responded to this by acting without delay. His diplomatic skills had always been superior to his ninja abilities. Because his chakra reserves were lower and his strike was weaker, he was less proficient with the gentle fist. As a result, he took a job as a civil servant and eventually found employment in the embassy. Before he'd caught up to the Konoha Nin, he'd forced his way through a group of Kiri Nin and out of the locked suite. He had stopped the ninja in time for Might Guy to come and kill him, even though he was outmatched by the ninja. Now that Hanabi was safe, they had an injured Hyuga to tend to. Well, either way, we owe you one. I've got some skill with seals. I could try and help. He gave a little laugh. Believe me, nothing will help. You're not the first to try. She took a moment to look down at him, then checked his temperature on a nearby chart. Well, your arm will be all right in a week or so. Your chest is another story. If you were a ninja, I'd say you'd never fight again. As it is, you already spend most of your time sitting around. It won't be much of a change. Your bedside manner is appalling. With a smile, she raised a scalpel. And now to take those eyes. He attempted to fight back, defending himself with his unharmed arm. She gave him a shoulder pat and laughed out loud. Sorry, couldn't resist. Orochimaru left his mark on you. Are any of his former servants sane? When Anko strode in, the doors flew open. All right. Let's rip those eyes out. Get the painkillers. They taste great. He won't need them. Akio and Karen looked at each other. No. We are not. That I can clearly see. Tsunade completed the Konoha mobilization orders while seated in her office. Setting down her pen, she took a deep breath and looked up and out of the window. A small swallow perched on the mantel outside as her hands folded in front of her. Breathing in the fresh, clean air that flowed through the open window, she felt inebriated. Her army was prepared. Time was all they needed. It would have been foolish of the Southern Alliance to attack. They would realize their mistakes and apologize. She stood up and moved to the window. With a big smile on her face, she shook her head while surveying the village. The people of Konoha were happy, their voices rising in a loud murmur through the air as the sun shone and the weather was clear. A knock on her door was heard. She turned and said, "Come in." Holding a big box, Kakashi walked in with the council trailing closely behind him. He appeared shaken. "What is it, Kakashi?" He set the box down firmly and opened it, letting out a sickening stench. Bad news from Kiri. She looked inside the box and wrinkled her nose. 2 bodies, charred to the bone, were found inside. Inside the box was a letter. She extended her arm to open it. War it is. The rock was slick underfoot as the rain battered the stone fort. Above, thunder roared, accompanied by lightning strikes and howling winds. 40 Ashigaru were positioned around the fortress walls and within the courtyard. The walls were constructed with cedar towers that had long, curved roofs, and the courtyard itself was made of hard stone and wood. Enclosed within the walls stood a graceful 3-story home featuring a wooden roof, columns, and bracing surrounding walls of light stone. Outside, the pale material was darkened by the rain, forming a row of tents. 2 pairs of eyes, one bright red and the other dull brown, measured the defenses from the nearby forest. After a brief moment of closure, the brown partner waved his partner to the right with a hand. The man on the left fanned out of sight, his form vanishing with a crack as he ran across the muddy grass. Without anyone noticing, the woman on the right made her way to the wall and ran up the 20-foot wall to a tower. She then flipped up and over the small wooden front and spun through the air. The woman flicked her wrists, driving a kunai into the necks of the two guards as they turned and began to cry out. After landing gracefully, Hinata turned to face the next tower. With the man's corpse in his hand, Ulquiorra nodded to her, his figure half hidden by the rain. A lightning bolt arced high overhead as he moved down and along the walls, slashing out with his sword and shining brightly. A thin line of blood appeared in the rain and then faded. When he was spotted, there was a hue and cry and swords and spears were drawn. As he cut a bloody trail across the wall, a group of archers knelt in the courtyard, knocked arrows to the string, and pointed up at him. He blew another man away with a bala after sweeping an arm off at the elbow. With a katana to the neck, he slashed his attacker's head in half just below the eyes, his arrow snapping the steel. He pushed back a group that had 10 dead in front of him. Dropping to her feet, Hinata charged the archers. Her Hokuto Shinken broke bones and tore organs, and her hands moved with such fluid ease that the henge vanished as she used it. The stunned archers were unable to react appropriately until she was among them. One was decapitated after she drove her hand into his throat, sending a shockwave through his body. She broke bones when she kicked another person in the side. She dropped beneath the wakazashi's reckless swing, letting the blade pass over her and hurt another archer before flipping up with her legs and kicking hard. Now, in self-defense, the archers had all dropped their bows and drawn their wakazashi. She managed to sidestep almost every blow, but recoiled when she felt one sever her clothes and slit her back open across her vertebrae. She saw one reach out to grab her, stunned by the blow, but he fell back when she managed to break his knee. Rolling on the ground, her wound hurting more from the movement of her back and the mud covering it, she got to her feet and struck again, shattering a man's skull into pieces. She stepped back, watching Ulquiorra and her back with her Baikugan wide. With his hands and blade crimson from the blood, his eyes lifeless and icy, he was removing the remaining walls, at least 24 dead by his side. An enemy shot an arrow at Hinata's back, but the arrow flew past her and struck another enemy in the throat. Hinata leapt aside in response. A captain of the Ashigaru stood in the door of the house, shining in his red and black lacquered armor, the gold kanji for fire imprinted on his chest. He had a quiver of white fleeted arrows on his back, a katana at his waist, and a bow in his hands. A man and a woman, both jonin, were by his side. She hurried past the archers, keeping her eyes on them. There were still 4, and she dodged their blows to the head and chest before dispatching them. After landing next to her, Ulquiorra glanced over her back. He narrowed his eyes, took off his cape, and wrapped it around her shoulders to cover the wound. A river of blood seeped into the rainwater from the 31 Ashigaru he had killed on the walls. She noticed that one was hurt, alive, and gave the impression that he had gotten away with it. He had seen both their true forms and their disguises. When they killed the final 3 camp defenders, he would tell Konoha and Hano no Taikoku. The woman jonin whispered, "Cifer Ulquiorra and Cifer Hinata," as her hand made a tanto. "You have quite the bounty on your heads." Ulquiorra cast a quick look at the 3. "Hinata, who will you fight?" Despite her wounds increasing pain, Hinata grinned. "I'll take the jonin. You kill the captain and take whoever I haven't killed already." A fair choice. After giving Ulquiorra a quick glance, the captain put away his bow next to the quiver and pulled out his katana, keeping it steady with both hands. Ulquiorra lifted his own, aiming it directly at him. As the jonin charged Hinata, the captain started to circle around him. Ulquiorra stepped forward and swung his sword forward, aiming it at Ulquiorra's face, then lunged at the man who deflected his blow with his sword. Ulquiorra was taken aback when the blow caused him to feel bruises on his skin in addition to hitting. He took a step back and swung his sword forward, but the man deflected the blow once more. He was a skilled swordsman. The captain lunged once more, then feinted back and took aim at Ulquiorra's wrist. With a slap, Ulquiorra retaliated, severing the man's neck with a clean cut. Remarkably, he propelled himself ahead, dodging the fatal blow, causing the blade to pierce through the lamellar neck guard of his helmet. The captain then collided with him, sending them both sprawling to the ground. Lifting his blade, the captain put it up to Ulquiorra's eye. "Can you regenerate from a blow to the brain?" He raised his head, the arrow on his bones preventing the blade from sinking any lower, and twisted his head, snapping the blade, saying, "I don't intend to find out." With a quick flick of his hand, he punched him in the stomach. The man trembled and toppled over him. He got to his feet and looked at Hinata. The woman was tending to a wounded Hinata, while the male Jonin lay on the ground, his head broken. Her right hand had a long senbon pierced through it, rendering it crippled, and she was lying on her side, clutching it as a long gash appeared just above her stomach. The woman began, but she never finished, "Don't make another move." She was torn apart by a bala. He ran to her and examined her wound. Though it was shallow, similar to the cut along her back, he was concerned that it might get infected because of the bad weather. Since he was not in need of medicine, he knew very little about it, and he had doubts about her abilities. "I'm sorry," she growled. "I got him easily, but she got me." That's the problem with the Hokuto Shinken and the gentle fist. Cripple the hand and you stop the Hyuga. His lip quirked in a tiny smile as he assisted her in standing. "I believe you have more wisdom in your hand than a whole library." She scowled. "Although I am grateful for your compliments, I don't follow." "Ah," she sobbed, realizing and feeling hurt. "They never taught us to aim for the hand. Always the chest, the head. I wonder at the intelligence of the shinobi world. The survivor has seen enough." A fire was burning close by as they sat in a cave. Ulquiorra examined the wound while sitting behind Hinata, who was only clothed up to her waist. He had not spent much time with Zalaporo Grants, and now he regretted not spending more time studying the human body under the eccentric scientist and physician. He saw that the blow had only scored the tissue under the skin, not the bone. Although the damage to the muscle was not too severe, he was concerned that it might cause more issues. He wasn't an expert, but it appeared to be a flesh wound similar to the one on her front, and he wished he knew more. He asked, "How do you feel?" as he bandaged the wound and wrapped bandages around her torso, simultaneously tying the two wounds. "Awful," she whimpered as she glanced down at her scabbard hand. When Ulquiorra completed his task, he made a tiny noise and caressed her hair. "I suppose I should feel lucky. Senbon are often poisoned. Your father wants you unharmed." "Well, I have my first battle scars." He helped her into a jacket and shirt, saying, "I hope you will have no more. We should return to Kiri or Suna." "Why?" "The campaign is just starting in earnest. And you have 2 wounds and I know medical knowledge, save for what I need to kill." She let out a furious sigh. "I'm fine. I'm not some weak child like I used to be." He stopped talking. "You were never weak. And you are my wife. I will not allow your pride to lead you to idiocy." "I remember little from the lectures of Hitaki, but I remember how he said it is easy for the simplest of wounds to fester and kill." She rubbed her hurt hands while growling. The rain persisted in its relentless assault on the fire, which sputtered. Quietly, she said, "Kei's no Kuni is closer. We can head to Suna," as she leaned back against him. He used Sonido and nodded before getting up and holding her hand. Gaara gave orders while positioned in front of 5 Suna Anbu squads. "Squads 1, 2, 3 and 4, I want you to head to Ishii, Kuma and Tori. They need advanced guards and elite Anbu. I want you to keep watch for any Hano no Taikoku movements, or any Konoha troops. Keep in touch with Suna and their villages. Divide your attention along the Tsuchi and Hai borders. I want advance warnings of any assault. Squad 5, I want you to advance to Kawa no Kuni, and to report any advance towards our eastern flank. From Kawa no Kuni, they can march straight here. Stay in constant contact. Take messenger birds and use the secret relays around the alliance." Dismissed. With a bow, they departed and vanished with gusts of wind, employing the Shunshin no Jutsu. He pulled the reports toward him as he sat at his desk. In Suna, there were 16,000 ninja, plus an additional 2,000 in reserve. Then there were the retired ninja and the couple hundred people in the academy. Following that, there were 14,000, including reserves, for the Ashigaru here. When the militia and town guards are not included, Kei's no Kuni had about 120,000 Ashigaru. There were an additional 100,000 people from the other western nations that were part of the Southern Alliance, along with 20,000 ninjas. That's 36,000 ninja and 234,000 Ashigaru, plus or minus a few thousand more for reserves. The numbers on the eastern flank will be similar. Konoha had 60,000 or more ninja, not including those from the villages they had conquered, which was the issue. With the majority coming from the Hai no Kuni and the remainder from their conquests, Hano no Taikoku had at least 500,000. He hoped the conquered forces would turn against the alliance if the war went well. Regretfully, he was aware that there was a good likelihood that some would stay in the Konoha Hano no Taikoku camp. It was a good opportunity to gain wealth and power. He looked up to see the puppeteer, Kankuro, looking serious. Ulquiorra is here with Hinata. With a small smile, Gaara noticed his brother's concern in his eyes. What's happened? Hinata's been wounded. He brought her here because it was closer than Kiri. Gaara stood up and rushed past his brother, with Kankuro trailing in his wake. They hurried to the hospital outside, passing through the dome of the Cage's building. Ulquiorra had his hands in his pockets as he stood outside a private room. He rushed over to give him a shoulder pat. Gaara. Ulquiorra. What happened? We attacked a fort near the Hai no Kuni. Kawa no Kuni border by the sea to reveal ourselves as the guerrilla force. She received a cut across the front above the stomach, just below the breast, and another across the back. Gaara scowled. Shallow or deep? Shallow. The one across the back missed the spine and neither hit any vital point or organ. However, the muscle on the back seemed damaged. I am no expert, however, and I could have been mistaken. I see why you brought her here. Be calm, my friend. We have the best doctors in K's no Kuni here, save for the capital. Ulquiorra gave a nod and turned to face his friend. You look tired. Is Konoha causing trouble? Of a sort. War has been declared. Konoha and their vassal villages are mobilizing, and Hano no Taikoku have declared war on K's no Kuni and Mizu no Kuni for the slight to their village. So, everything is proceeding as we planned. Have there been any battles yet? None. We've only been at war since the day before yesterday. Mizukage. Dono reports a large fleet in the Great Bay of Hai no Kuni, and the fleet of Cha no Kuni is readying. I don't doubt that we shall be the first to feel the wrath of Konoha. Kakuro raised her voice. We are close to the border. And Mizu no Kuni, no disrespect to our allies, is only a few islands. They'll destroy it after getting rid of the bigger threat. Or what they perceive as the bigger threat. Ulquiorra gave a nod. Any other news I should know? One of the shinobi in the Konoha embassy in Kiri tried to kidnap Hanabi. Hyuga Akio saved her. Surprising, I know. Something to do with the caged bird seal. The Suna forces are nearly all mobilized. I have Anbu all over the Western Front, spying and reporting. We are ready. Good. Gaara looked up and down, shrugging. I've read the reports. Your campaign is very impressive. Hano no Taikoku has a bounty of 12 million ryo for the destruction or capture of the guerrilla force. You have a personal bounty of about 8 million at present. 8. I imagined it would be more. I have killed Orochimaru, Sasori and Deidara. Ah yes. They found your battle site. It's 8 from Konoha at present. It'll be going up soon enough. They'll put the 12 with the 8. After clearing his throat, Kankuro gave his brother a stern look. Gaara had a somber expression. They know about Deidara. And Uchiha Sasuke has been named his killer. He has already claimed the bounty. I tried to collect the Deidara bounty for you, but Konoha already claimed it. I failed, but I managed to get the Sasori bounty. You are a fair sight richer, but Konoha and Hano no Taikoku are bragging how their precious Uchiha has killed one of the most powerful of Iwa's ninja. Ulquiorra gave a nod. The Uchiha has the potential to kill him. He certainly has the skill, if they have trained him as well as they said. I see that it is no great lie. He could have killed him. But, from his words, Deidara had a grudge with Itachi. He probably trained to fight Uchihas. What was the grudge over? Apparently, Itachi did not appreciate his art. I quote. Those eyes. Those damn eyes. Judging me. Judging my art. You and Itachi. One and the same. Considering several of his jutsus were designed to destroy a target utterly, I would imagine they were designed to kill Itachi. Gaara took a slow blink. Shukaku grunted, and he heard it. Deidara sounded like someone possessed by hatred. This rage is delicious. Gaara, it would have been an amazing battle between you and him. His art and our sand. What slaughter. Shukaku. San, I'm relieved that we avoided a fight with him. Consider his C0. Just picture the consequences for us. You're right. I still wish I could have watched the fight. Too much time has passed since our last murder. I see your relationship with Shukaku has become more cordial. Ulquiorra's knowledge of the conversation did not surprise Gaara. He and I have tried to put aside our past issues. He has curbed his hunger. Until our war. Ulquiorra fixed his gaze on Gaara's eyes, causing her to tense up and feel Shukaku smile. You shall feed soon enough, Ichibi. And you shall feast well. A physician quickly left the room. Cifer. Sama? Yes? Your wife is fine. The wounds are not serious. She'll be up and about in a few days. There is no infection or illness in the wounds, but there was a great potential for them. Her hand was most at risk. It severed a few nerves and hit a vein. You were wise to bind the wounds so soon. Ulquiorra said, if I were wiser, I would have left her at home, worried about her well-being. Kankuro muttered, from what I've seen, she would have followed after you. Ulquiorra dismissed them with a sly smile from Gaara and went back to the doctor. Anyway, the worst should be past, but she should stay here for a time and rest. She shows a few signs of exhaustion. I know you stopped for a few days, but she killed a good few men with her gentle fist technique. That has caused a huge chakra drain, and it has a side effect on her bones. The chakra spike through her hands has caused her hands to suffer some detriment. I have no access to Hyuga medical records, so I can't say if this is a common problem. My guess is that they're using the Hokuto Shinken causes extra friction in her bones, and thus pain and damage. You could ask her now. She's ready to see you now. Ulquiorra stepped past him and said, thank you, to the man. One moment. She has to avoid strenuous activity. I know you are newlyweds, but if you want her to recover properly, you should avoid any active interactions. Ulquiorra gave a nod. I understand. With a laugh, Kankuro nudged Gaara when Ulquiorra came in. You should see about getting a girl. It'll be good for you. What about that Karen chick? You kept on looking at each other in Kiri. Yes, indeed. What a lovely girl. The blood of her maidenhood on your. Shukaku, if you can complete that sentence, I'll go live in the mountains as a monk, never hurt another living thing again. Shukao winced and stopped talking. Ulquiorra cast Hinata's gaze. She was sitting in bed beneath a pale cover, dressed in the immaculate hospital sheets, and gazing out a nearby window. Her wounds were dressed with new bandages. She gave him a smile as she glanced around. Hello, Ulquiorra. Kun. Ulquiorra sat beside her and steadied her from head to toe before he rested his hands on hers. How are your wounds? Well, they don't hurt anymore, but they still sting a bit. My hand is all right, so I can carry on fighting. He stroked her wrist with his bandaged hand and said, good. The doctor mentioned that your hands are damaged. Hinata flinched. Yes, he told me that. The Hyuga don't usually have problems with their hands, but sometimes we do. She sighed, rubbing at her wrist. The gentle fist moves chakra through the tenketsu in the Hyuga's fingertips into the target. In order to use Hokuto Shinken, I have to push the chakra in a short stream from my finger. Hokuto Shinken hurts the bones as it requires a more focused stream from further up the arm. I see. You increase the flow from the tenketsu in your upper arm and send it through your arm to your hand and into the target. Yes. The normal gentle fist can kill in a similar fashion to the Hokuto Shinken, but it takes more time as the tenketsu in the target have to be close. It's like peppering a target with senbon. The Hokuto Shinken is like firing a cannon. It causes the bones to vibrate at a higher rate than the normal gentle fist, because the chakra flows through all the nerves and out of the tenketsu. With a slow nod, Ulquiorra touched her arm. You have been fighting for some time. How damaged are your hands? Not too bad. You are an appalling liar. I run the risk of permanent damage if I don't have a rest for a while. I've been overzealous in our battles. I have counted at least 4 men who've had their skulls blown up. Overzealous is an understatement. You are to rest for a while. I don't want you hurt. With a sigh, she nodded. I understand. I'll try and be more efficient. I'm still working on the amount I need to fire. I tried it in our spars in the Hyuga estate. I still failed to perfect it, but I did get a general idea. Where will you stay? In here with you. And we have been forbidden from strenuous activities. She said the words out loud, then flushed. Okay. He stood up and gave her a lip kiss. He paused and slowly blinked and thought, I need to speak a little more to Gaara. I'll return presently. Konoha. Nin in the Kiri embassy tried to kidnap Hanabi. Don't worry. Akio stopped the ninja in time for Gaia to kill him. He said it was the caged bird seal. She gave a nod. The seal forces any nearby branch Hyuga to help any main house member in danger. There have been cases of an old branch member breaking through a 30-strong force and saving a main member. That seal is very complex. I have not yet asked. About Neji? After you died, he was on the fence. He could not help me much. Oto. San knew how he had come to respect you and had guessed at how I felt about you. He never guessed? Oh, he guessed, but he never knew. He thought I was just a friend of yours. Anyway, Neji threw himself into his work. He soon became a Jonin and then an Anbu. And then, Danzo took an interest in him. After you died, Danzo was allowed to establish root. He had it in the shadows for years, but now he offered placement for anyone who met his expectations. He was the first Hyuga to be offered a place. He told me he would accept. For you. He sighed. He broke free from fate. Danzo was always worried that a Hyuga would cause problems. A main would be pampered and a branch would be a weak link because of the seal. What is root? The elite force at the command of Danzo and the Hokage. They are the assassination and sabotage force. So is Anbu and the basic force. Yes, but they can be traced. Anyway, Neji became one of his 2 lieutenants alongside a boy called Sai, who was assigned to guard Uchiha. Teme is the new member of Team 7. A pale fellow with painting utensils? Yes. Neji said he would become the strongest Hyuga to ever live, in your honor. I must say, I never anticipated my words would have such power. With a somber smile, she nodded. He still beats me in training matches. Still, he told me he doesn't hold back because he wants me to become as strong as I can be. Ulquiorra blinked and nodded. I'll be back soon. He walked out, softly shutting the door. Seated close by, Gaara gazed out over the village. How is she? Well enough. I heard the comments about Karen. Gaara shrugged, remaining silent. Ulquiorra stopped there. We'll hunker down here until she's fully recovered. Is there any help you need from me? Gaara gave him a serious look for a moment before responding, no. But I have a bad feeling. Who would they send first? It depends on who is in command. Who in particular? If Danzo is in command. Assassins will come after you and the daimyo and make sure your successors are malleable. Tsunade, I'm unsure. Let us hope Tsunade is in command. Forgive me, but Hinata and I have not eaten in some time. I'll have some dinner brought here. We can eat with your wife. Thank you. Dinner was casual and small. Ulquiorra assisted Hinata in eating while the Sand siblings sat in the room and ate from trays. Hinata and Tamari got along pretty well, with Tamari offering to help her with her taijutsu and Hinata offering to help Tamari with her shurikenjutsu. After the meal, the conversation shifted to Kekkei Genkai and Jutsu. The news that Gaara had activated his own Kekkei Genkai intrigued Ulquiorra. I didn't know you had a Kekkei Genkai, Gaara. Neither did I. Shukaku told me about it after you saved us. I've been practicing quite a bit since then. He said that a side effect of being a Jinchuriki is that the Biju's chakra tends to clash with our own, as you know. This can lead to the yin chakra in our bodies being partially suppressed. Yin chakra? Ah, I forgot. It's not discussed in academies. Yin chakra is the basis of imagination and spiritual energy, used in Inton. Yang chakra is the basis of vitality and physical energy, used in Yodan. I see. Yin is the spiritual side of our chakra and yang is the physical aspect of our chakra. Yes. I imagine that your Ryatsu is similar to Inten in some way. Anyway, you understand how DNA works? Well, the hypothesis is that the yang chakra we possess comes from our parents, within our DNA, giving us our appearances and other traits, such as hair color. So, the theory goes. The yin chakra in our bodies contains our Kekkei Genkai? Yes. There are problems with that theory, of course. Kekkei Genkai would most likely be in our normal DNA without any interference from either yin or yang chakra, for example. Yes. There are some flaws in this way of thought. Of course. Be that as it may, yin chakra is the stuff of emotions and will and so on. In order to activate some Kekkei Genkai, you need to have a certain amount of this, either from birth or from stress. For example, the yin chakra in the Hyuga is at a certain level for all of them, activating the Byakugan from birth. Hinata gave a nod. Ulquiorra nodded understandingly and offered her some fruit. That's right. If what the elders say is true, it is only a small amount. Probably why they have a superiority complex. We have our Kekkei Genkai without any effort. Thank you, Ulquiorra. Gaara put his hands in his lap and shrugged. Anyway, the chakra of the Biju we possess causes problems with our own yin chakra, which can lead to some Jinchuriki from Kekkei Genkai clans not possessing them no matter what. There are some exceptions as there always are, but it is the general rule. The only way around it is to build stronger ties between yourself and the Biju so that they will regulate their chakra so ours might flourish. Since then, I have been able to use the Jishin. Ulquiorra lowered the plate, leaving it empty, and set it on the adjacent table. Isn't that the Kekkei Genkai the Sandaime Kage possessed? Yes. My father, the Yondaime, also possessed it. It is not a common Kekkei Genkai, but a fair few clans possess it. My father used gold dust so he could restrain our sand when we became berserk. There are a lot of sealing scrolls in a private vault containing the gold dust, so I'm training to use that. The speed of your lighter sand combined with denser and heavier gold. A powerful combination. Gaara gave a nod. What of you, Hinata? What jutsu have you learned save for the gentle fist? Hinata hesitated. None save for the Niku Henge no Jutsu and a few other genjutsu. Ulquiorra scowled. Your sensei taught you nothing else? Is that not her job? With a sigh, Hinata massaged her hand. The sensei system doesn't quite work like that, Ulquiorra. Kun. I find that rather confusing. I thought Kakashi didn't teach Haruno or I anything because of his bias in favor of the Uchiha. Well, yes, but there is more to it than that. The sensei we are assigned to teaches us teamwork and basic techniques, like taijutsu, chakra control, shuri kenjutsu and so on.
So that's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the channel for more awesome stories like this. Thank you. See you all in my next video.